A 17-year-old girl poisoned three armed men without hesitation. But that wasn't her darkest moment. No, that came years earlier when she ran barefoot through frozen mountains, knowing her own father would kill her before sunrise. This is the story of Mara Holloway, the broken child who became a healer, the hunted who became a hunter, and the girl who learned that survival isn't the end of the story, it's only the beginning. Stay with me until the end of this journey. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far Mara's story travels. The cold came first. Not the door slamming behind her, not the sound of her father's roar shaking the cabin walls, not even the terror that had finally cracked through 17 years of endurance like ice-splitting stone. The cold came first, and it bit into Mara Holloway's bare feet the moment they hit the frozen ground. She ran. The Blue Ridge darkness swallowed her whole. No moon, no stars, just the skeletal silhouettes of winter trees clawing at a black sky, and the sound of her own ragged breathing tearing through her chest. Behind her, the cabin door banged open again. "Mara!" His voice, whiskey rough, mean as a whip crack, chased her into the woods. She didn't look back. Looking back meant slowing down, and slowing down meant dying. She'd learned that lesson at 7 years old, the first time he dragged her by her hair across the cabin floor for burning his supper. Her lungs screamed. Her feet were already numb, leaving dark prints in the frost-silver grass. The thin nightdress she wore, the only thing she'd had on when she'd finally decided that tonight would be different, offered no protection against the December wind that knifed through the ridge. She stumbled over a root, caught herself against a pine trunk, kept moving. "You come back here, girl! You hear me? You come back!" The words grew fainter. Not because he'd stopped chasing. Samuel Holloway never stopped when he was in a mood, but because Mara was putting distance between herself and the only home she'd ever known. Home. The word was a bitter joke. That cabin had been a prison built of rotting wood and broken promises, every room haunted by her mother's ghost and her father's fists. Her mother. Mara's throat tightened, but she pushed the thought away. No time for ghosts. No time for anything but the desperate animal instinct that screamed, "Run, run, run." The ridge sloped downward, steep and treacherous. Mara half ran, half fell through the underbrush, bare skin catching on thorns and branches. She felt the sting, the warmth of blood mixing with cold sweat, but pain had become such a familiar companion that it barely registered. What registered was the silence. Her father's voice had stopped. Mara froze, one hand braced against an oak tree, listening. The mountain offered only wind and the distant call of an owl. No cursing, no crashing footsteps, nothing. That scared her more than the shouting. Samuel Holloway knew these woods better than anyone. He'd hunted them for 40 years, could track a deer for 3 days without losing the trail, could move through the darkness like smoke. The fact that he'd gone quiet meant he'd stopped wasting energy on noise and started hunting in earnest. Mara forced herself to move. Her body was shaking now, shock, cold, or both. She couldn't tell anymore. She half walked, half stumbled down the slope, her vision blurring with tears she refused to shed. Crying was weakness, and weakness was what got you hurt. How did it come to this? She knew exactly how. The same way every terrible night in that cabin had come to pass, with whiskey, with rage, and with her father's conviction that she was responsible for every misfortune that had ever befallen him. Tonight, it had been the stew. Too salty. Too cold. Didn't matter that she'd used the same recipes she'd been making since she was 12. Didn't matter that he'd stumbled in 3 hours late, already drunk. He'd tasted one spoonful, thrown the bowl against the wall, and backhanded her so hard she'd seen stars. But that wasn't new. What was new? What had changed everything? Was the look in his eyes when she'd gotten back up. Not anger. Something worse. Something final. He'd reached for the rifle above the mantel, and Mara, who had survived 17 years by making herself small and quiet and invisible, had finally understood that survival wasn't enough anymore. If she stayed, she would die. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. The violence that had been simmering in Samuel Holloway for years was about to boil over, and she would drown in it, so she'd run. The creek found her before she found it. One moment Mara was stumbling through darkness, the next her foot plunged into icy water and she went down hard, hands plunging into the shallow stream bed. The shock of cold water drove the air from her lungs. She gasped, choked, tried to stand. Her legs wouldn't work. Mara collapsed onto the rocky bank, her body finally betraying her. The adrenaline that had carried her this far was spent. Her feet were blue-white in the starlight, frost already forming on her wet nightdress. She tried to curl into herself for warmth, but even that small movement sent pain lancing through her ribs where her father had kicked her last week. "Get up," she told herself. "Get up or die here." Her body didn't listen. The cold was different now. Not biting, almost gentle, like a blanket being pulled slowly over her head. Mara's eyes drifted closed. She thought of her mother, dead these past 8 years from fever and exhaustion and a broken heart. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad joining her. Maybe. Well, hell! The voice came from somewhere above her, rough but not cruel. Male, but not her father. Mara's eyes snapped open. She tried to scramble backward, but her limbs were too heavy, too cold. A dark shape loomed over her, broad-shouldered against the stars. "Easy," the voice said. "Easy now. I ain't gonna hurt you. Please." The word came out as barely a whisper. "Please don't." "Hush." Not unkind. "You're half froze and bleeding on my creek bank. Ain't nobody gonna hurt you, girl. Can you stand?" Mara tried, failed. Her teeth were chattering so hard she could barely speak. "Can't." The man, whoever he was, made a sound that might have been sympathy or frustration. Then, without warning, he bent down and scooped her up like she weighed nothing at all. Mara's instinct was to fight. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to claw, to bite, to run, but she had nothing left. No strength, no heat, no fight. "I got you," the stranger said, his voice steady as stone. "Cabin's just over the rise. You're safe now." Safe. The word was foreign in Mara's mouth. She'd never been safe a day in her life. But consciousness was slipping away from her like water through cupped hands, and she was too tired to argue with kindness, even if it turned out to be a lie. The last thing she registered before darkness took her was warmth. The solid heat of the stranger's chest, the rough wool of his coat, the steady rhythm of footsteps carrying her away from the creek and into something that looked, from a distance, almost like hope. She woke to firelight. For a long, disoriented moment, Mara didn't know where she was. The ceiling above her was unfamiliar, rough-hewn logs instead of the stained planks of her father's cabin. The bed beneath her was softer than anything she'd slept on in years, and the warmth, blessed warmth, wrapped around her like a living thing. She tried to sit up. Pain exploded through her body, sharp enough to make her gasp. Her ribs, her feet, her hands. Everything hurt in ways that felt both familiar and freshly terrible. "Don't." Mara's head snapped toward the voice, heart hammering. A man sat in a rough-carved chair near the fireplace, his face half-shadowed by the flames. He was older than her father, maybe 50, maybe more, with a weathered face and iron-gray hair pulled back from his forehead. His eyes, when they met hers, were the color of creek stones, gray-blue and steady. "Your feet are frostbit," he said calmly. "Ribs are bruised, maybe cracked." "You move too quick, you'll make it worse." Mara's breath came fast and shallow. "Where?" "My cabin, about 3 miles south of where I found you." He gestured to a tin cup on the small table beside the bed. "Water's there if you want it. Got some broth warming too, when you're ready." She didn't reach for the cup, couldn't. Trust was a luxury she'd never been able to afford. The man seemed to understand. He settled back in his chair, hands resting loose on his knees, deliberately non-threatening. "Name's Elias Boone. This here's my land, has been for near about 30 years. I was checking my traps when I heard you stumbling through the woods like a wounded deer." Mara said nothing. "You don't gotta tell me your name," Elias continued. "Don't gotta tell me nothing you don't want to, but you should know, ain't nobody gonna find you here unless I want 'em to. This hollow's remote, even by ridge standards. You're safe." There was that word again. Safe. Why? The question scraped out of Mara's throat. "Why would you help me?" Elias was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke, his voice carried an old grief. "Had a daughter once. She'd be about your age now, if she'd lived. Fever took her when she was 10. He looked back at Mara. Couldn't save her, but I can help you, if you'll let me. Something in his tone, the absolute absence of expectation,
This story
the
was
quiet
posted
honesty,
on the
made
channel
Mara's
west
throat
of
tighten.
Betrayal.
She'd
Please
spent
do not
17
repost
years
it in
learning
any
to hear the
form.
lies beneath men's words. Samuel Holloway had been a master of false kindness, of promises that turned to ash the moment they left his mouth. But this man, this Elias Boone, didn't sound like he was lying. Mara, she whispered. My name is Mara Holloway. If the name meant anything to him, he didn't show it. He just nodded once, solemn as a vow. All right, Mara Holloway, you can stay here long as you need. I got food, I got shelter, and I got no use for company that don't want to be here. When you're healed enough to decide what comes next, we'll talk. Till then, you rest. He stood, moving with the careful economy of a man who'd spent his life in hard country. At the door, he paused. One more thing. That night dress you came in, I burned it. Too torn up to save and covered in blood besides. Put some of my late wife's clothes on the chair there. They'll be too big, but they're clean and warm. I'll be outside if you need anything. Won't come in unless you call. Then he was gone, the door closing soft behind him. Mara stared at the rough wood ceiling, her mind reeling. This didn't make sense. Men didn't help without wanting something. They didn't offer shelter without expecting payment. They didn't... Her gaze fell on the clothes draped over the chair. A wool dress, faded but carefully mended. A shawl. Thick stockings. Dead wife's clothes. The thought should have been disturbing, but instead it felt like something else entirely. Like being wrapped in someone's remembered tenderness. Like being given a gift by a ghost who understood what it meant to need protection. Slowly, painfully, Mara pulled herself upright. Her ribs screamed in protest, but she gritted her teeth and reached for the dress. If this was a trap, she'd spring it on her own terms. And if, by some miracle, it wasn't, if Elias Boone truly meant what he'd said, well, Mara Holloway had survived 17 years of hell. She could survive kindness too, even if it scared her more than her father's fists ever had. The first 3 days passed in a haze of pain and watchfulness. Mara slept more than she'd thought possible, her body demanding rest. It had been denied for years. When she was awake, she watched Elias the way a cornered animal watches a predator, alert for any sign of threat, any crack in the calm facade. The threats never came. Elias moved through his days with a quiet rhythm that seemed carved from the mountain itself. He rose before dawn, tended a small garden plot even in winter, checked his traps, split wood. He brought Mara food 3 times a day, simple fare, but more than she'd eaten in months. Venison stew, cornbread, wild greens cooked with fatback. He never commented on how fast she ate, never made her feel ashamed of her hunger. He never touched her, never even came close unless she asked for help, which she tried not to do, pride and fear warring in her chest. But on the 3rd day, when she tried to stand and her frostbitten feet buckled beneath her, Elias was there in an instant, catching her weight with hands that were strong but somehow gentle. Easy, he murmured, guiding her back to the bed. Frostbite takes time. You push too hard, you'll damage what's trying to heal. I can't just lie here, Mara said through gritted teeth. I need to... To what? Run again? Elias's gaze was knowing. Girl, you ran yourself near to death. Your body's telling you to rest. Might be wise to listen. You don't understand. Try me. Mara looked away, jaw tight. She couldn't explain the fear that lived in her bones, the certainty that staying in one place too long would bring disaster down on her head. Samuel Holloway might be miles away, might have given up the chase, but men like him didn't forget, and they didn't forgive. Elias seemed to read her silence. He crossed to a small wooden chest in the corner and pulled out something that glinted in the firelight. When he turned back, Mara's breath caught. A rifle. Old but well maintained. This here was my wife's, Elias said quietly. She could outshoot me on a good day, and most of my bad ones too. Taught our daughter to handle it before she could barely lift it. He set it carefully against the wall near the bed. If someone comes here uninvited, you shoot first and ask questions after. I don't care who it is. Understand? Mara stared at the rifle, then at Elias. You're giving me a gun? Loaning, and only if you promise not to shoot me when I bring you breakfast. The corner of his mouth quirked, not quite a smile, but close. It was the first hint of humor Mara had seen from him, and it did something strange to her chest, something that felt dangerously like trust. "I promise," she whispered. Elias nodded. "Good. Now rest. Healing's hard work, but it's the only work that matters right now." Quote. By the end of the first week, Mara could walk, haltingly, painfully, but she could walk. Elias had been right about the frostbite. 2 of her toes had turned black, and for a terrifying day and night, Mara had been certain she'd lose them. But Elias had packed them in snow, then wrapped them in cloth soaked with some mixture of herbs that smelled like earth and bitterness. Whatever it was, it worked. The blackness receded. The swelling went down. The toes stayed attached. "What is that?" Mara asked one morning, watching him prepare another batch of the foul-smelling poultice. Comfrey mostly, some golden seal, touch of yarrow. Elias didn't look up from his work. "Plants will heal you better than most doctors, if you know which ones to use." "Who taught you?" "My wife. She learned from her grandmother, who learned from a Cherokee woman who lived up in these mountains before the government moved them out." His voice went soft. "Sarah could cure just about anything, long as the person wanted to live." Mara heard the weight in those last words. "She couldn't cure your daughter." "No." Elias's hand stilled. "Sometimes wanting ain't enough." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who understood that some griefs were too heavy for words. Mara changed the subject. "The clothes fit better now." It was true. The wool dress that had hung off her frame like a sack was starting to fit properly as Elias's cooking put meat back on her bones. She'd even gained enough strength to help with small tasks, mending, cleaning, sorting the dried herbs that hung in bundles from the cabin rafters. Elias glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "You look more like her every day." "Your wife?" "No." He turned back to his work. "Someone else." Mara waited, but he didn't elaborate. It was another piece of the puzzle she was slowly assembling. This quiet man with his stone cabin and his ghosts, who'd taken in a half-frozen stranger without asking for her story. She wanted to ask who he meant, wanted to push, but she'd learned long ago that some doors only opened when you stopped trying to force them. "I could check the traps tomorrow," she offered instead. "If you show me where they are." Elias looked at her for a long moment, weighing something. Then he nodded. "All right, but we go slow, and if your feet start hurting, we turn back. Deal?" "Deal." That night, for the first time since she'd arrived, Mara didn't dream of her father's fists. She dreamed instead of walking through winter woods with a rifle over her shoulder and the weight of silence pressing soft against her ears. It felt like freedom, even if she didn't quite believe in it yet. The mountain taught her slowly. Elias was a patient teacher, which was fortunate, because Mara had been taught nothing useful in her 17 years except how to duck a blow and swallow her pride. She didn't know how to track game, how to read weather in the shape of clouds, how to tell poisonous plants from healing ones. She knew how to survive cruelty. She didn't know how to survive wilderness, but she learned. On their first trip to check the traps, Elias showed her how to read the forest. The way deer trails looked different from rabbit runs. The scratch marks bears left on trees to mark territory. The specific pattern of broken twigs that meant something had passed through recently, and whether that something walked on 2 legs or 4. "You see this?" Elias crouched beside a muddy patch near the creek, pointing to an indentation. "That's a boot print. 3, maybe 4 days old. Someone came through here, followed the water south." Mara's heart kicked against her ribs. "Who?" "Can't say for sure. Could be a hunter from one of the other hollows. Could be someone just passing through." He glanced up at her. "You worried it's your pa?" She'd told him the basics a few days earlier, enough that he understood why she'd run, if not the full depth of her father's brutality. Elias hadn't pressed for details. He just listened, nodded, and said, "He comes here. He won't leave standing." Now looking at that boot print, Mara felt the old fear coil in her stomach. "What if he finds me?" "Then we deal with it." Elias stood, his face carved from granite. "But Mara, you gotta understand something. This mountain's big, and these hollows are deep. A man could search for months
This story
and never
was
find what he's
posted on the
looking
channel
for.
west of
Reply.
Betrayal. Please
He
do not
strike you as the
repost it
patient
in
type?
any form.
Mara almost laughed. Samuel Holloway was many things. Patient wasn't one of them. No, she admitted. Then he's probably back in whatever hole he crawled out of, telling himself you died in the woods and drinking away his guilt. Elias's tone was matter-of-fact, but not unkind. Men like that don't chase ghosts. They find new targets. The thought should have brought relief. Instead, it made Mara feel hollow. She'd been her father's target for so long, she didn't know who she was without that weight. Elias seemed to sense her thoughts. Come on, got 2 more traps to check, and I want to show you how to skin a rabbit before the light goes. The rabbit lesson was harder than Mara expected. Not the skinning itself, that was straightforward enough, if messy, but the moment when Elias handed her the knife and stepped back, making it clear that this was her task to complete, something in Mara rebelled. Her hands shook. I can't, she whispered. Why not? I can't. Elias studied her for a moment, then took the knife back. But he didn't finish the job. Instead, he sat down on a stump and gestured for Mara to do the same. What are you afraid of? He asked quietly. Mara's throat tightened. I'm not afraid. You're terrified, and that's all right, but you gotta name it before you can face it. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she was fine, that 17 years of survival had made her strong, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, what came out was the truth. My father used to make me watch, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. When he butchered hogs, chickens, anything. He said I needed to learn that everything dies and most things die screaming. He said, she swallowed hard. He said I'd die screaming too someday. Just like my mother. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. When Elias finally spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. Your pa was wrong about a lot of things, Mara, but he was especially wrong about that. Death ain't always screaming. Sometimes it's quiet. Peaceful, even. And knowing how to take a life quick and clean, whether it's for food or protection, that ain't cruelty. That's mercy. He held out the knife again. This rabbit's already gone. Can't hurt it now. But you can honor it by not wasting it, by using what it gave to keep yourself fed and warm. That's what survival looks like out here. Not cruelty, just necessity. Mara looked at the knife, then at the rabbit. Its eyes were glassy and still. Whatever it had been, quick and nervous and alive, was gone now. All that remained was meat and fur. She took the knife. Her hand still shook, but she made the first cut, then the second. Elias talked her through each step, his voice calm and steady, until the pelt came away clean and the meat was ready for the pot. When it was done, Mara's hands were covered in blood. She stared at them, expecting to feel sick, expecting to see her father's cruel smile in the back of her mind. Instead, she felt capable. Good work, Elias said, taking the pelt. We'll cure this, and come spring, you'll have warm gloves. Something in Mara's chest loosened. Not healing exactly, but the beginning of it. Maybe that was enough. Winter deepened, and with it, Mara's education. She learned which herbs could break a fever and which could kill a man. She learned how to set snares, how to find water even when the creek froze over, how to read the stars for direction. Elias taught her everything he knew, and Mara absorbed it all with the desperate intensity of someone building a new foundation from scratch. But it wasn't all practical lessons. One evening, as they sat by the fire eating venison stew, Elias pulled out a battered book. You read? Mara shook her head. My father said it wasn't worth teaching girls. Figures. Elias opened the book, a collection of poems from the look of it. Well, it's worth it. And we got nothing but time. So the reading lessons began, halting at first, frustrating, with Mara stumbling over words that seemed to shift and change every time she looked at them. But Elias was patient, and slowly, painfully slowly, the letters began to make sense. The first full sentence she read without help was from a poem about mountains. I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills. What's it mean? Mara asked. Elias was quiet for a moment. Means different things to different people. To me, it means the mountain's always there. Doesn't matter what valley you're walking through. You look up, and there it is, steady, unchanging. Mara traced the words with her finger. Like a promise. Something like that. She read the line again, committing it to memory. For 17 years, the only constant in her life had been fear. The idea that something could be steady, could be relied upon, felt like a revelation. That night, she dreamed of mountains that touched the sky. Nchian. 3 months after Mara had stumbled into Elias's hollow, spring began to creep up the ridge. The snow melted in patches, revealing mud and new green shoots. The creek ran high and fast with runoff. Birds returned, filling the woods with sound after months of silence. And Mara, who had arrived half dead and hollow-eyed, began to look like something other than a ghost. She'd gained weight. Her hair, which she'd hacked short with a knife in a fit of anger at her father, had grown out enough to braid. The frostbite scars on her toes were pink and shiny, but she could walk without pain now. Run, even, when the mood struck her. More than that, she'd gained something she couldn't name, a kind of stillness that came from knowing she was safe, a kind of strength that came from learning she was capable. Elias noticed. "You're healing," he said one morning as they worked in the garden plot, turning soil for spring planting. "My feet, you mean?" "Everything." Mara paused, leaning on her hoe. "I don't feel healed." "Healing ain't the same as healed. It's a process. You're in it. That's what matters." She wanted to believe him, but there were still nights when she woke gasping, certain she heard her father's footsteps on the cabin porch. Still moments when a sudden movement made her flinch before she could stop herself. What if I'm always like this? The question came out smaller than she'd intended. What if I never stop being afraid? Elias set down his own tool and looked at her with those steady creekstone eyes. Then you learn to do what needs doing even when you're scared. Courage ain't not being afraid, Mara. It's being afraid and moving forward anyway. Before she could respond, a sound cut through the morning quiet. Voices. Men's voices coming up the trail toward the cabin. Mara's blood turned to ice. Her hand went automatically to her belt, where she now kept a knife. Elias had given it to her last week, and she'd been practicing with it every day, not for hunting, but for the thing neither of them talked about. For the day her father might find her. Elias's expression didn't change, but his hand moved to rest on the rifle propped against the garden fence. "Get inside," he said quietly. "Don't come out unless I call for you." "Elias? Inside!" The command was gentle, but absolute. Mara ran. From the cabin window, she watched 3 men emerge from the tree line. They weren't locals. Their clothes were too fine, their boots too new. City men, playing at being frontiersmen. And they were walking straight toward Elias like they owned the place. The tallest one, a man with slicked back hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes, called out, "You Elias Boone?" "I am," Elias replied, his voice flat. "And you're trespassing." The man's smile widened. "Now, that's where you're wrong, friend. See, we represent this Greenville Settlement Company, and according to our records, this land," he gestured broadly at the hollow, "belongs to our client, has for near about 6 months now." Mara's stomach dropped. "That's so?" Elias's tone could have frozen the creek solid. "Funny, I've been living here 30 years and ain't nobody told me it wasn't mine." "Well, that's the trouble with mountain folk, isn't it? Y'all don't pay much attention to legal niceties like deeds and surveys." The man pulled a folded paper from his coat. "But the law's the law. We're here to inform you that you've got 30 days to vacate the premises. After that, well, I'm sure we can come to some arrangement." The way he said arrangement made Mara's skin crawl. Elias didn't move. "And if I don't?" "Then we involve the sheriff. And trust me, friend, that won't go well for you." "Elias Boone ain't your friend," Elias said quietly, "and he don't take kindly to thieves dressed up in fancy words." The atmosphere shifted. The 3 men tensed, hands moving toward weapons Mara couldn't see but knew were there. The tall one's smile finally disappeared. "You threatening us?" "Stating fact. This is my land, my cabin, my hollow. The only way you're taking it is over my dead body." That can be arranged. The words hung in the air like smoke. Mara's hand tightened on the rifle Elias had left by
This
the
story
door.
was posted on
Every
the channel
instinct
west of
screamed
the
at her to
trail.
intervene,
Please
to
do
step
not
outside
repost
and
it
stand
in any
beside the
form.
man who'd saved her life. But Elias had told her to stay hidden, and she'd learned over these past months that Elias Boone didn't give orders lightly. The standoff stretched. Then, finally, the tall man laughed, a cold, ugly sound. 30 days, old man. Use them wisely. The three men turned and walked back down the trail. They didn't hurry, didn't look back. They moved with the confidence of people who knew the law was on their side. Mara waited until they disappeared into the trees before bursting out of the cabin. Elias, I know. His face was carved from stone, but his hands, his steady, capable hands, were shaking. I know. What are we going to do? The question hung between them. We, not you, not I. We. Elias looked at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, something in his expression shifted. Not quite hope, but something close to it. We fight, he said simply. And if fighting don't work, we get creative. Mara thought of the herbs hanging in the cabin, the ones Elias had taught her to identify. Healing plants, poisonous plants, plants that could save a life or end one, depending on the dose. How creative? She asked quietly. Elias met her gaze, held it. And in that moment, Mara saw that he understood exactly what she was offering. Creative enough, he said. The first drops of rain began to fall, pattering against the new-turned soil like a promise. Or a threat. Mara couldn't tell which, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She'd run from her father's cabin 3 months ago, barefoot and bleeding and half dead with fear. She wouldn't run from this. Not again. Never again. The rain turned the hollow into a different kind of prison. For 3 days it fell without ceasing, turning the trails to mud and the creek into a roaring torrent. Mara and Elias stayed inside, the cabin walls pressing close while they planned their defense in whispers, as if the trees themselves might be listening. They'll come back, Elias said on the second night, staring into the fire. Men like that always do. The paper they showed me could be real, could be forgery. Either way, they want this land bad enough to threaten an armed man in broad daylight. Mara sat cross-legged on the floor, the rifle across her lap, cleaning it for the 3rd time that day. The familiar motion steadied her hands. Why this hollow? There are dozens of others up and down the ridge. Water. Elias gestured toward the sound of the creek outside. This here's one of the only year-round streams for miles, and the soil's good, better than most. A man could build a real settlement here if he had the mind to. Or a company could. Yeah. The word came out bitter. Progress, they call it. Civilization creeping up the mountain like rot. Mara set down the cleaning cloth. You said we'd fight. What did you mean? Elias was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old decisions. I meant that I'm too old and too tired to start over. This land, it's all I got left of Sarah and Emma. Their graves are up on that ridge, under the old oak. I'll be damned if I let some city men with fake papers run me off the place where my family rests. But if the law's on their side, then the law's wrong. Elias looked at her, firelight dancing in his eyes. Sometimes the law and what's right ain't the same thing. You of all people should know that. Mara felt the truth of his words in her bones. The law had never protected her from her father's fists. Samuel Holloway could beat his daughter bloody, and no sheriff would intervene because a man's household was his own business. The law protected property, power, and men who knew how to use both. It didn't protect girls who ran barefoot into the snow. So what do we do? She asked. Elias smiled, a grim, feral thing. We make them wish they'd picked a different hollow. The plan came together over the next 2 days, piece by careful piece. Elias knew the land like he knew his own hands, every depression and rise, every game trail and hidden spring. He showed Mara the places where a man might stumble, where logs could be positioned to look natural but would roll under unwary feet, where the ground looked solid but was actually a thin crust over mud deep enough to swallow a boot. We ain't trying to kill nobody, Elias said firmly. Just discourage 'em. Make this hollow seem more trouble than it's worth. But Mara was thinking ahead, to the moment when discouragement wouldn't be enough. She'd seen the look in the tall man's eyes. He wasn't the type to be deterred by inconvenience. Men like that only understood force. On the fourth day, the rain stopped. The hollow emerged washed clean, every leaf and stone gleaming in the sudden sunlight. Steam rose from the ground in ghostly wisps. It was beautiful in a way that made Mara's chest ache. This place that had become home without her noticing, this patch of mountain that felt more like sanctuary than any church ever could. She found Elias on the ridge where his wife and daughter were buried. Two simple wooden crosses, weathered gray by time and elements. He stood between them, hat in his hands, lips moving in silent conversation with the dead. Mara waited at a respectful distance until he noticed her. "Sorry," she said. "Didn't mean to intrude." "You ain't." Elias settled his hat back on his head. "Was just telling Sarah about our visitors. She always had a better head for strategy than me. Wish I could hear what she'd say." "What do you think she'd say?" Elias smiled faintly. "Probably something about fighting smart instead of hard. Sarah was practical that way." He paused. "She'd have liked you, I think." The words hit Mara harder than she expected. She swallowed against the sudden tightness in her throat. "I wish I could have known her." "Yeah, me too." Elias turned to face the valley below, where the cabin sat tucked among the trees. "You know, when I found you by that creek, half frozen and scared out of your mind, you reminded me of someone. Took me a few days to figure out who." "Your daughter?" "No." He shook his head. "Your mother." The world seemed to tilt. "What?" Mara's voice came out strangled. "You knew my mother?" "Knew of her anyway. Rachel Garrett, before she married your pa. She came through these parts once, maybe 20 years back, traveling with a group of preachers, singing hymns and trying to save souls." Elias's expression was distant, remembering. "She had red hair like yours. Same green eyes, same look about her, like a deer that's been hunted too long." Mara felt like the ground had dropped away beneath her feet. Her mother had never spoken about her life before Samuel Holloway. Mara had assumed there was nothing to tell, that her mother had always been the broken, silent woman who died when Mara was 9. She was here? In this hollow? Just passing through. Spent one night in the cabin, her and the preacher she was traveling with. Sarah fed them, gave them a place to sleep. Elias's voice went soft. In the morning, Rachel helped with the washing. We got to talking. She told Sarah she was running from something. Wouldn't say what, just that she needed to disappear for a while. And then? And then the preacher convinced her to come to one of his revivals down in the valley. That's where she met your pa." Elias looked at Mara, his eyes full of old sorrow. "I remember Sarah saying she had a bad feeling about that man. Said his eyes were too hard, his smile too quick. But Rachel was young and scared and looking for protection. She thought marriage would save her." Mara's hands had curled into fists. "It killed her instead." "Yeah, I reckon it did." They stood in silence, the weight of revelation settling between them like snow. Mara felt something shifting inside her chest, the pieces of her history rearranging themselves into a new pattern. Her mother hadn't always been defeated. Once, she'd been a girl who ran from danger, who sought refuge in mountain hollows, who stood on ridges and made choices about her future, just like Mara. "Why didn't you tell me?" Mara asked finally. "Didn't seem right at first. You were healing, didn't want to drag up old pain." Elias turned to face her fully. "But now I think you need to know. You come from fighters, Mara. Your mama ran once. She just ran toward the wrong thing. You got a chance to run towards something better." "I'm not running anymore." "I know, that's why I told you." A sound cut through the moment. The distant jingle of harnesses, the creak of wagon wheels. Both of them went still, listening. "They're early," Elias said grimly. "Didn't expect them for another week at least." Mara's heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands were steady when she checked the knife at her belt. "What do we do?" "Same as planned. You stay out of sight, watch from the cabin. I'll talk to them, see if reason works." He met her eyes. "If it don't, if things go bad, you know what to do." She did. They discussed it in careful detail. The herbs, the water supply, the ways a mountain could defend itself if you knew its secrets. They made their way down the ridge together, moving quickly but quietly.
This story was
By the
posted
time
on
they
the
reached
channel
the cabin,
west of
Mara
Betrayal.
could see the wagon
Please do
coming
not
up the trail,
repost it
a
in any
fancy
form.
thing, painted green with gold lettering on the side. 4 men rode alongside it on horseback, more than last time. Inside, Elias murmured. And Mara, whatever happens, you did nothing wrong. Remember that. She squeezed his arm once, then disappeared into the cabin. From the window, she watched Elias position himself in the yard, rifle held casual but ready. The wagon rolled to a stop 20 feet from the cabin. The tall man from before dismounted, still wearing that snake oil smile. But this time he wasn't alone. A portly man in an expensive suit climbed down from the wagon seat, mopping his forehead with a handkerchief despite the cool morning air. "Mr. Boone," the tall man said cheerfully, "I see you're still here. That's disappointing." "This is my land," Elias replied, his voice flat as stone. "Got the deed to prove it." The portly man stepped forward, wheezing slightly. "I'm afraid your deed is outdated, Mr. Boone. My name is Cornelius Webb, representative of the Greenville Settlement Company. We've conducted a new survey, and our claim supersedes yours. The territory office in Raleigh has already approved the transfer." Convenient, that survey happening without me knowing about it. Webb's smile was oily. "Progress waits for no man, Mr. Boone. Now we're prepared to offer you fair compensation for any improvements you've made to the property. $5 ought to cover that old cabin and whatever gardens you've got." $5. For 30 years of life. For Sarah's grave and Emma's memory and every stone Elias had laid with his own hands. No. The word was final as a gunshot. The atmosphere shifted. The men on horseback moved their hands toward their belts. Mara's fingers tightened on the rifle. Webb sighed, the sound theatrical. "I was afraid you'd say that. Mr. Boone, I'm trying to be reasonable here. But if you force my hand—" "Your hand!" Elias laughed, short and bitter. "You're the one trespassing with armed men, threatening a man on his own property." "That don't sound reasonable to me." "The law disagrees." Webb pulled out another paper, this one stamped with an official-looking seal. "This is a writ of eviction, signed by Judge Harrison himself. You have until sundown to gather your belongings and leave. If you're still here after dark, these men," he gestured to the riders, "have been deputized to remove you by force." Mara's breath caught. Deputized. That changed everything. Resisting deputies was a crime that could get Elias hanged, but Elias didn't flinch. "That writ's as fake as your survey. Harrison's been dead 3 months. I know because I helped carry his coffin." Webb's smile finally cracked. The tall man beside him took a step forward, hand on his pistol. "You calling Mr. Webb a liar?" he asked softly. "I'm calling him a thief." Elias raised the rifle, not quite pointing it at anyone, but the threat was clear. "And I'm telling you all to get off my land before somebody gets hurt." For a moment, Mara thought it might actually work. The men shifted nervously. Even Webb looked uncertain. Then one of the riders, a young man with pockmarked skin and mean eyes, spat into the dirt. "We don't take orders from mountain trash." He drew his pistol. Everything happened at once. Elias swung the rifle up. Webb dove behind the wagon. The tall man pulled his own weapon. Mara burst through the cabin door, her rifle already at her shoulder. "Stop!" Her voice rang across the clearing, high and clear and carrying all the authority her 17 years could muster. "Nobody moves, or I start shooting." 6 pairs of eyes swung toward her. The pockmarked man laughed. "A girl? They got a girl fighting their battles?" "This girl knows which one of you is standing in hemlock," Mara said calmly. "The tall one by the wagon wheel." "Bomb by those pretty purple flowers you're trampling? You get the sap on your skin, you'll be dead in an hour. Painful, too. Starts with burning, then paralysis, then you stop breathing." The tall man looked down, went pale, took a hasty step backward. It was a bluff. Those weren't hemlock flowers, just wild violets. But the men didn't know that. And the seed of doubt, once planted, was hard to uproot. "She's lying," Webb said, but his voice shook. "Am I?" Mara shifted her aim slightly, pointing the rifle at the water barrel strapped to the wagon. "That water you brought from town, you drink it yet?" "What?" "Because if you haven't, I'd suggest you don't. Creek water up here can be tricky this time of year. All kinds of things wash down from the high country. Minerals, plants, sometimes worse. She smiled, cold as January frost. But I'm sure you'll be fine. It was another bluff, probably. But watching Webb's face drain of color, Mara felt a fierce joy burn through her chest. These men had come here expecting to bully an old man and steal his land. They hadn't expected resistance, hadn't expected strategy, hadn't expected her. The standoff held for 10 heartbeats, 20. Then Webb cleared his throat. "We'll be back," he said, trying to salvage his dignity, "with real law, real deputies, and then we'll see how brave you are." "We'll be here," Elias replied. The men retreated to their horses, mounting up with wounded pride written across their faces. The wagon turned awkwardly in the clearing, wheels churning mud. As they disappeared down the trail, the pockmarked man looked back once, his expression promising violence. Mara kept her rifle up until they were completely out of sight. Then, slowly, she lowered it. Her hands were shaking now, adrenaline draining away and leaving exhaustion in its wake. "That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen," Elias said quietly, "or the most foolish. Maybe both." He laughed. A real laugh this time, surprised and proud. "Your mama would have done the same thing. She had fire in her under all that fear." Mara thought of the woman she'd known, silent and sad, with bruises she tried to hide and a cough that never quite went away. It was hard to imagine that woman standing up to armed men. But maybe that was the point. Maybe her mother had used up all her fire trying to survive Samuel Holloway, and by the time Mara was old enough to remember, there was nothing left but ash. "They will come back," Mara said, "and next time they'll bring more men." "I know. So what do we do?" Elias looked at the cabin, then at the ridge where his family rested, then back at Mara. "We prepare, and we hope it's enough." The next week passed in tense preparation. Elias taught Mara everything he'd been holding back, the dangerous knowledge he'd hoped she'd never need, which mushrooms could induce vomiting, which roots could cause temporary blindness, which berries would cramp a man's gut so badly he'd wish for death. "This is dark knowledge," he warned her as they worked in the garden, harvesting plants most people would never touch. "Used wrong, it can kill. You understand that?" "I understand." "I mean it, Mara. Once you cross certain lines, there's no going back." She looked at him steadily. "I crossed that line the night I ran from my father. I chose to live. Everything since then is just details." Elias studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right then. Let's make sure you keep living." They prepared the hollow like a fortress. Subtle defenses that wouldn't be obvious to outsiders, but would make life miserable for anyone who tried to settle here by force. Elias repositioned deadfalls on the trails. Mara planted patches of poison ivy in strategic locations, disguising them among the regular greenery. They moved supplies into a hidden cache up on the ridge, in case they had to abandon the cabin. And every night, Mara ground herbs into powder and stored them in small cloth bags, preparing for the possibility that words and warnings wouldn't be enough. She tried not to think about what that meant, tried not to imagine the weight of another person's death on her hands. But in the dark hours before dawn, when sleep wouldn't come, she forced herself to face it. If it came down to Elias's life or theirs, she knew which she'd choose. On the 8th day, a stranger came to the hollow. Not Webb or his men. This was someone different. A boy, really, no more than 14, with a shock of dark hair and nervous eyes. He approached the cabin slowly, hands raised and empty. "Mr. Boone," he called. "I ain't armed, just got a message." Elias stepped out onto the porch, rifle ready. "From who?" "Mr. Whitaker. He owns the settlement company." The boy swallowed hard. "He wants to meet with you. Says there might be a way to settle this without more trouble." "Whitaker came himself?" "Yes, sir. He's staying at the boarding house in Greenville. Says he'll meet you anywhere you choose, anytime. Just wants to talk." Mara watched from the window, her instincts screaming trap. Men like Webb didn't suddenly develop consciences. If this Whitaker wanted to talk, it was because he thought he could gain more through negotiation than force. Elias seemed to be thinking the same thing. "Tell Whitaker I'll meet him in 3 days, noon, at the crossroads where the ridge trail meets the valley road. He comes alone, or he doesn't come at all." The boy nodded quickly. Yes, sir, I'll tell him. He started to leave, then paused.
This story
Mr.
was
Boone,
posted on the
I
channel
grew
west
up on
of
these
Betrayal.
mountains. My pa
Please do
always
not
spoke well of
repost it
you.
in any
I
form.
wanted you to know not everybody in town agrees with what the company's doing, but not everybody's willing to stand against it either, Elias said quietly. The boy's face flushed. No, sir, reckon not. He turned and hurried back down the trail, shame and relief warring in his posture. When he was gone, Mara came out onto the porch. It's a trap. Probably. So you're not going? Elias looked at her with something like amusement. Of course I'm going. If there's even a chance of settling this without bloodshed, I gotta take it. And if there's not? If they're planning to ambush you? Then I'll need someone watching my back. He smiled faintly. You ever shot a man, Mara? No? Hope you don't have to. But if it comes to that, aim center mass, squeeze the trigger slow, and don't hesitate. Hesitation gets you killed. Mara nodded, her mouth dry. 3 days. They had 3 days to prepare for whatever was coming. She spent the first day gathering more herbs. The second day cleaning and oiling both rifles until they gleamed. The third day she spent in silence, watching the hollow and committing every detail to memory. The way sunlight filtered through the oak leaves, the sound of the creek running over stones, the smell of Elias's pipe smoke mixing with wood fire and mountain air. This place had saved her life. Now it might cost her everything. The morning of the meeting dawned clear and cold. Elias dressed carefully, his best shirt, his good hat, making himself presentable for civilization, even if he despised what it represented. You don't have to come, he said as Mara checked her rifle one last time. Yes, I do. They left an hour before noon, moving down the trail on foot. The crossroads was only 2 miles from the cabin, but they took their time, Elias showing Mara the best vantage points along the way. You'll wait up there, he said, pointing to a rocky outcrop that overlooked the meeting spot. Got a clear view, good cover. If things go wrong, you shoot to scare, not to kill. Understand? And if scaring them doesn't work? Elias's face was grim. Then you do what you have to. But Mara, you shoot a man even in defense, the law won't see it as justified. They'll see a mountain girl who murdered a deputy. You'll hang. So will you if they take this land. That's different. I'm old. Had my life. You got yours ahead of you. Mara grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. Don't you dare talk like that. Don't you dare give up before this even starts. Something in Elias's expression softened. Ain't giving up. Just being practical. He squeezed her hand. But you're right. We fight. Both of us. Whatever comes. They reached the crossroads with 15 minutes to spare. Elias positioned himself in the center of the intersection, visible from all directions. Mara climbed to her vantage point, settling among the rocks with her rifle ready. From here, she could see 3 of the 4 trails that met at the crossroads. The 4th was blocked by trees, but anyone coming that way would have to cross open ground to reach Elias. The minutes crawled past. Noon came and went. Mara's hands grew sweaty on the rifle stock. Then, finally, movement. A single rider coming up the valley road. Not Webb. Not the pockmarked man or the tall one with the snake smile. This was someone new. A man in his 50s, well-dressed, but not ostentatious, sitting his horse like someone who'd grown up riding. He had a weathered face and steady eyes that reminded Mara, uncomfortably, of Elias. He stopped 10 feet from where Elias stood. Mr. Boone, I'm Silas Whitaker. You're late. Had to make sure I wasn't followed. My men have a tendency toward enthusiasm. Whitaker dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. I came alone, as requested. May we talk? Elias gestured to a fallen log by the roadside. Talk. Both men sat, leaving careful distance between them. Mara kept her rifle trained on Whitaker, watching for any sign of deception. I'll be direct, Whitaker said. I don't like what's happening here. Webb exceeded his authority when he threatened you. The writ he showed you was fabricated. Judge Harrison is indeed dead, and no new judge has been appointed yet. The survey is real, but the claim is shaky at best. Then why are you here? Because shaky claims become solid ones if nobody challenges them. And because I'm a businessman, not a thug. Whitaker pulled out papers, different ones than before, Mara could see even from a distance. This is a deed to 50 acres in the next valley over. Better water than your hollow, flatter ground. The company will build you a new cabin, relocate your family graves if you wish, and pay you $200 in cash. In exchange, you leave your current land peacefully. Elias didn't even look at the papers. No. Mr. Boone, please consider. No. The word was absolute. I don't want your money. Don't want your new land. I want what's mine, what I've earned, what my wife and daughter are buried under. Whitaker sighed. I understand. I do. But this is bigger than both of us now. The territory government wants development. The railroad's coming through in 5 years. This whole region is about to change, whether we like it or not. You can either profit from that change or be swept away by it. Or I can stand my ground and make them work for every inch. That will end badly for you. Maybe, but at least I'll end it on my own terms. Elias stood. We done here? Whitaker remained seated, his expression troubled. There's one more thing. The girl. The one who threatened my men. Where is she? Mara's finger moved to the trigger. None of your business, Elias said coldly. Actually, it might be. You see, I did some checking, asked around town. Turns out Samuel Holloway's been telling people his daughter ran off 3 months back. Said he figured she died in the woods. But then my men described a red-haired girl with green eyes and a mountain accent, and I got to thinking, leave her out of this. I'm not interested in returning her to her father, if that's what you're worried about. Whitaker stood now, matching Elias's stance. Holloway's got a reputation. I know what kind of man he is. But that girl, she threatened my men with poison and traps. She's smart, capable, and she's wasting away up in that hollow when she could be doing something useful. What are you talking about? Whitaker pulled out one more paper, this one a letter, from the look of it. Greenville's growing. We need people who know the mountains, know the plants, know how to survive hard country. I'm opening a clinic. Need someone to assist the doctor, gather medicinal herbs, teach settlers which berries won't kill them. The pay's fair, room and board included. And most importantly, he looked directly at the rocks where Mara was hidden, as if he knew exactly where she was. It's a chance at a different kind of life, a legal one, a safe one. Mara's heart hammered. He knew she was there, had probably known from the moment he arrived. She's not interested, Elias said. Why don't we let her decide? The silence stretched. Then Mara stood, keeping her rifle trained on Whitaker as she climbed down from the rocks. When she reached the crossroads, she positioned herself beside Elias, presenting a united front. Whitaker studied her with those steady eyes. You're younger than I expected. Old enough, Mara replied. Clearly. He held out the letter. This is from Dr. Morrison. He runs the clinic. Lost his assistant last month to typhoid, and he's been looking for someone to replace her. I told him about a girl who knew mountain medicine, and he said to bring you to town for an interview. No obligations, just a conversation. Mara didn't take the letter. Why would you help me? Because I'm not Webb. I don't believe in threats and violence when persuasion might work. Whitaker's expression was serious. You want to know the truth? I grew up in hollows like yours, worked my way out through education and stubbornness. I built this company because I believe development can be done right, with respect for the land and the people who live on it. But men like Webb make that hard. They see mountain folk as obstacles instead of partners. Pretty words, Elias said, but words don't change facts. You still want my land. Yes, because it's valuable, but I'm willing to compromise. Here's my final offer. You keep your cabin and 1 acre around it, including the graves. The rest of the hollow becomes company land, but we won't develop it for at least 10 years. That gives you time. And if the girl comes to work at the clinic, I'll pay her wages directly to you, $50 a month. More money than you'd see in a year of trapping. It was a clever offer. Mara could see that immediately. It gave Elias time and money. It gave her a future beyond this hollow, and it gave Whitaker what he wanted, the land, without the messiness of violence. But it also meant surrender. I need time to think, Elias said finally. You have 3 days. After that, Webb takes over negotiations, and he won't be nearly as generous. Whitaker mounted his horse, looking down at them both. I meant what I said, Mr. Boone. I respect what you've built here, but the world's changing. You can change with it or be buried by it. He rode away, leaving
This
Mara
story
and
was
Elias
posted on the
standing in
channel
the
west
crossroads
of
with the
Betrayal.
weight of impossible
Please do not
choices
repost
pressing
it
down
in
on
any
their
form.
shoulders. They walked back to the cabin in silence. Only when they were safely inside, with the door barred and the fire rebuilt, did Elias finally speak. What do you think? Mara set her rifle down carefully. I think he's smarter than Webb. More dangerous, too, in his way. Yeah. Elias sank into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his years. He's offering us a way out, a good one, considering, but it still means losing this place. Not all of it. 1 acre and the cabin. Surrounded by company land, by settlers and progress and everything that destroyed the old ways. Elias shook his head. It's a slow death instead of a fast one, but it's still death. Mara knelt beside his chair, taking his weathered hand in hers. Then we refuse. We fight. And you? What about that clinic, that chance at a real life? This is a real life, here, with you. For now. But I'm not going to live forever, girl. What happens when I'm gone? You going to stay in this hollow alone, fighting off settlers and companies till they finally grind you down? The question hit harder than Mara expected. She'd been so focused on the immediate fight that she hadn't thought past it, hadn't let herself imagine a future where Elias wasn't there. I don't know, she admitted. Well, you better start thinking about it. Because that clinic job, that's an opportunity. A chance to use what you've learned to help people, to build something that lasts beyond this hollow. Elias squeezed her hand. Your mama ran toward the wrong thing when she was scared. Don't make the same mistake. If you run toward something worth having. But leaving you ain't leaving if I'm the one sending you. Mara pulled away, standing abruptly. No, I won't do it. I won't abandon you to face Webb alone. You wouldn't be abandoning me. You'd be surviving. That's what I've been teaching you all these months, how to survive. Survival isn't enough. The words burst out of Mara, raw and desperate. I survived 17 years with my father. It made me small and scared and mean. You taught me to live. You gave me... Her voice cracked. You gave me everything. I won't leave you. Elias stood, crossed to her, and pulled her into a fierce hug. Mara buried her face in his shoulder and let herself cry. For her mother, for the childhood she'd never had, for the future she was terrified of losing. All right, Elias murmured into her hair. All right, we'll figure it out together, whatever comes. They stood like that for a long time, while outside the hollow waited and the world prepared to change everything. 3 days turned into 2, and still no decision had been made. The hollow seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the axe to fall. On the morning of the second day, Mara woke to find Elias already up, standing on the porch with his rifle cradled in his arms. The sun was barely a promise on the eastern ridge, the world still wrapped in that particular silence that comes just before dawn. Couldn't sleep? She asked, joining him. Too much thinking. He didn't look at her, his gaze fixed on the trail leading down to the valley. Been trying to figure out what Sarah would do. She always saw things clearer than me. What do you think she'd say? Elias was quiet for a long moment. She'd say we're being fools. That land is just dirt and trees, and living people matter more than dead ones. He finally turned to look at Mara. She'd say I should take Whitaker's offer and spend whatever time I got left making sure you had a future. But she ain't here, and I am. And I'm tired of men in suits deciding what's best for folks they never met. His jaw tightened. I'm tired of running, of compromising, of watching everything good get swallowed up by progress. Mara understood. She'd spent 17 years compromising with her father's violence, making herself smaller and quieter, hoping that if she just gave enough, the beating would stop. It never had. Compromise with cruelty only taught cruelty that it could take more. Then we fight, she said simply. Yeah. Elias smiled, grim and determined. Yeah, we do. They spent that day preparing in earnest. No more half measures, no more hoping for peaceful resolution. If Webb was coming, and he would be coming, they would be ready. Mara worked in the garden, harvesting the plants they'd cultivated for this exact purpose. Monkshood, its purple flowers beautiful and deadly. White snake root, which could poison milk and kill anyone who drank it. And the pokeweed berries, which looked harmless but would cramp a man's stomach until he wished for death. She ground them carefully, mixing them with wild herbs to mask the bitter taste. By afternoon, she had 3 small pouches of powder, enough to doctor a pot of stew for a dozen men. Elias watched her work with an expression she couldn't quite read. Pride mixed with sorrow, maybe. Or fear for what she was becoming. "You sure about this, he asked as she sealed the final pouch. "No." Mara's hands were steady even if her heart wasn't. "But I'm sure about not letting them take you. That's enough." That night they ate supper in silence, both aware that this might be their last peaceful meal. Mara tried to memorize everything, the taste of Elias's venison stew, the crackle of the fire, the way lamplight made shadows dance on the log walls. If tomorrow brought violence, she wanted to remember what she was fighting for. Just as they were clearing the dishes, a sound split the darkness outside. Not boots on the trail or wagon wheels, something else. Hoofbeats. Coming fast. Elias grabbed his rifle. Mara reached for hers. They moved to the windows, watching the trail. A single rider burst into the clearing, horse lathered and blowing hard. Not Webb's men, not Whitaker. The boy who'd delivered the message before, the one with the nervous eyes. He nearly fell off his horse in his haste to dismount. "Mr. Boone?" His voice cracked with urgency. "They're coming, tonight. Webb convinced the new deputy that you're squatters. They're bringing 20 men to burn you out." Elias threw open the door. "How long?" "Hour, maybe less. I heard them planning it at the boarding house and rode straight here." The boy was gasping for breath. "They're saying you attacked Mr. Whitaker at the crossroads, shot at him. It's all lies, but the deputy don't care. He wants to make an example." Mara's blood ran cold. 20 men, armed and deputized, with the law's blessing to use whatever force necessary. Even Elias's mountain expertise couldn't stand against those odds. "You need to run," the boy continued. "Both of you. There's a cave system up on the North Ridge. My pa used to hide there during the war. You could—" "No." Elias's voice was granite. "I'm done running. Mr. Boone, please. Go home, son, and thank you for the warning, but what happens next ain't something you want to see." The boy looked at Mara, desperate. "Make him see sense. They'll kill him." Mara met his eyes steadily. "Then they'll have to kill us both." The boy stared at her like she'd gone mad. Maybe she had. But madness and courage looked the same from certain angles, and Mara had learned that sometimes the only sane response to an insane situation was to plant your feet and refuse to move. The boy left, his face pale with horror. As his hoofbeats faded, Elias turned to Mara. "Last chance. You can still run. Take the rifle. Head for that cave. Nobody would blame you." "I would." Mara checked her rifle, her movements efficient and sure. "We doing this?" "We're doing this." They worked quickly, converting the cabin into a fortress, barred the door and shuttered the windows, leaving only narrow gaps to shoot through, moved furniture to create barriers, filled every bucket and pot with water in case of fire. Elias showed Mara how to reload quickly in the dark, how to aim by sound when visibility was poor, and Mara prepared the stew. She used the largest pot, filled it with water and whatever provisions they had on hand. Venison, potatoes, wild onions. A normal meal except for the powder she stirred in at the end, just enough to make 20 men violently, miserably sick, but not quite enough to kill. Probably. She'd never tested the dosage on humans before, had only Elias's warnings and her own careful calculations to guide her. But if it came down to Webb's men burning them alive or taking a chance on the poison, the choice was clear. "What if they don't eat it?" Mara asked as she set the pot to simmer. "They will. Mountain nights are cold and men who've been riding hard get hungry. We just need to make them think we're offering hospitality." Elias smiled without humor. "Mountain folk are supposed to be friendly to strangers, right? That's what all those city papers say." The plan was simple, which didn't mean it would work. When Webb arrived, they would offer surrender, ask for time to gather their belongings, offer the stew as a gesture of goodwill while they packed. Once the men were incapacitated, Elias and Mara would slip away into the mountains, taking only what they could carry. It meant abandoning the cabin, losing the land, everything Elias had sworn to protect. but it meant surviving. You sure about this? Mara asked. Once we poison them, there's no going back. They'll hunt us until we're caught or dead. They're already hunting us.
This story was
At least this
posted
way.
on the channel
We'll
west
choose
of
when
the
and
trail.
how the fight happens.
Please do not repost
Elias
it
loaded
in
his
any
rifle
form.
with steady hands. Besides, you mixed it weak, right? They'll be sick, not dead. Can't hang us for giving men bad stew. Mara wasn't sure the law would see it that way, but she didn't argue. They were past the point of legal niceties now. An hour passed, then another. Mara began to hope the boy had been wrong, that Webb had changed his plans, that maybe torches appeared on the trail. Not one or two. Dozens. A river of fire flowing up toward the cabin, carried by men whose voices rose in rough laughter and cruel anticipation. Here we go, Elias murmured. You remember what to do? Surrender, stall, serve the stew. Mara's voice was steadier than she felt. If it goes wrong, we shoot to wound and run for the North Ridge. Good girl. The torches surrounded the cabin, forming a circle of light and heat. Mara counted silhouettes against the flames. 23 men, more than the boy had said. Some carried rifles, others held torches or clubs. All of them looked ready for violence. Webb stood at the front, his face twisted with vindictive pleasure. Next to him was a man wearing a deputy's badge, young, eager, with the dangerous confidence of someone given authority before wisdom. Elias Boone, Webb's voice rang out. You're surrounded. Come out with your hands up and nobody has to get hurt. Elias opened the door slowly, rifle pointed at the ground. Mara stayed behind him, visible but not threatening. What's this about? Elias called. We ain't done nothing wrong. The deputy stepped forward. You're charged with squatting on company land and threatening lawful representatives with deadly force. You got one chance to surrender peacefully. We didn't threaten nobody. We defended our home. That's not what Mr. Webb says, and he's got witnesses. The deputy gestured to the men behind him. Now come out, both of you, or we come in. Your choice. Mara watched Elias's face, saw the moment he made his decision. He lowered the rifle completely. All right, we'll come peaceful. Just let us gather our things first. We got nowhere to go, and it's a cold night. Webb laughed. You should have thought of that before you decided to play Mountain Man. Please. Mara stepped forward, making her voice small and frightened, not hard to do. We just need an hour to pack food and clothes. You can watch us the whole time. We won't try anything. The deputy looked uncertain. He was young enough that some part of him probably still believed in fairness, in giving people a chance. Half hour, he said finally. You come out before then with your belongings. We'll escort you off the property. But any tricks, and we burn the cabin with you in it. No tricks, Elias promised. But it's been a long day and I got stew on the fire. Enough for all of you if you want it. No sense letting good food go to waste. The deputy's eyes narrowed. What kind of stew? Venison. Made it this morning, been simmering all day. Elias gestured toward the cabin. You're welcome to it. Consider it payment for the trouble we've caused. Webb started to object, but one of the men behind him spoke up. Hell, I'm starving. Been riding since noon with nothing but hardtack. Me too, another agreed, and it smells damn good. The deputy wavered. Mara could see him weighing suspicion against hunger, authority against the grumbling of his men. Finally, he nodded. All right, bring out the stew, but you two stay in sight the whole time. Any sudden moves and we start shooting. Understood. Elias disappeared into the cabin, Mara following. They worked quickly, ladling the poisoned stew into tin cups. Mara's hands shook slightly as she worked, knowing that each cup she filled was a choice, a line crossed. They would have burned us alive, she reminded herself. This is mercy compared to that. They carried the cups outside on trays, distributing them to the waiting men. Most took them eagerly, hunger overcoming caution. A few hesitated, but peer pressure and the cold night air won out. Webb didn't take any. Neither did the deputy. They stood back, watching with suspicious eyes while their men ate. Mara's heart sank. The plan required everyone to eat. If Webb and the deputy stayed alert while their men fell sick, they'd figure out what had happened before Elias and Mara could escape. But then one of the men, the pockmarked one from before, spoke up. Boss, you should try this. Mountain folk might be stubborn, but they know how to cook. Webb shook his head. I'll pass. Suit yourself. More for me. The pockmarked man took a second helping, grinning. The deputy still hadn't moved. Mara caught his eye, saw the calculation there. He knew something was wrong, knew this was too easy. It's not poisoned, if that's what you're thinking, Mara said quietly. You can watch me eat some if you want. She ladled herself a cup from a different pot, the one she'd kept separate, and drank deeply. The deputy watched, then slowly nodded. All right. He took a cup, sipped cautiously. Not bad. Relief flooded through Mara. Now they just had to wait. The men settled around the clearing, eating and talking while Elias and Mara went back inside to pack. Mara moved mechanically, shoving clothes and supplies into a canvas bag. Her mind was racing, counting minutes, waiting for the poison to take effect. How long? 15 minutes? 20? The texts Elias had shown her weren't specific. Different bodies processed toxins differently. Outside, the conversation continued, punctuated by laughter. Someone made a joke about mountain women. Someone else started singing a bawdy song. The night felt almost festive, like a celebration rather than an eviction. Then the first man groaned. Mara froze, listening. Another groan. A curse. The sound of someone retching. What the hell? Webb's voice, sharp with alarm. Johnson, you all right? Something's wrong. My stomach... The words cut off with the sound of violent vomiting. Chaos erupted. Men stumbled away from the fire, clutching their guts. More retching, curses, someone screaming that they'd been poisoned. Boone, Webb roared. What did you do? What was in that stew? Elias grabbed his rifle. Now, we go now. They burst out the back of the cabin, away from the torches and the sick men. The forest was pitch black, but Elias knew these woods blind. He led Mara through the darkness with sure steps, heading for the north ridge. Behind them, gunshots cracked through the night. Random, panicked. Men too sick to aim straight, shooting at shadows. Stop! Stop, or we'll shoot! The deputy's voice, tight with pain but still functioning. He must have eaten less than the others, or maybe his younger body was fighting off the poison better. More shots, closer this time. A bullet whined past Mara's ear, so close she felt the displacement of air. Split up, Elias hissed. You go left, I'll go right. Meet at the cave if we get separated. No, I'm not leaving. Do it! He shoved her toward the left fork in the trail. They can't chase both of us. Now go! Mara ran. Branches whipped her face. Roots tried to trip her, but she kept moving. Behind her, she could hear pursuit. Boots crashing through undergrowth. Voices calling to each other. But they were going after Elias. They'd chosen to chase the old man instead of the girl. Mara skidded to a stop, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She couldn't leave him, couldn't let him face them alone while she ran to safety. She turned back. The slope was steep here, rocky and treacherous in the dark. Mara used it to her advantage, climbing up and around, circling back toward the sounds of pursuit. If she could get above them, get into position. Gunfire exploded ahead, once, twice, 3 times. Then silence so complete it made Mara's ears ring. Got him, someone shouted. The old bastard's down. No, 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 no. Mara ran toward the voices, abandoning stealth for speed. She burst into a small clearing lit by the torch one of the men had brought. 3 figures stood over a fourth lying motionless on the ground. Elias. He wasn't moving. The world seemed to slow down, every detail burning itself into Mara's mind with painful clarity. The way Elias's rifle lay just beyond his outstretched hand. The dark stain spreading across his shirt. The deputy standing over him with a smoking pistol. And Webb, stepping forward with a smile that made Mara want to scream. Well, Webb said, that's one problem solved. Something inside Mara broke. Or maybe it crystallized. All the fear, all the grief, all the rage she'd carried for 17 years, it focused down to a single point of absolute clarity. She raised her rifle. Step away from him. All 3 men spun toward her. The deputy's gun came up, but Mara was faster. She fired, aiming for his shoulder. The shot went wide, panic and poor light, but it was close enough to make him dive for cover. The other 2 men scattered. Webb stumbled backward, his earlier bravado evaporating. Mara advanced into the clearing, working the rifle bolt, chambering another round. I said, step away. You little bitch, Webb started. She shot at his feet. Dirt exploded inches from his boots. Webb yelped and scrambled back.
This story was
Next one goes
posted
through
on
your
the
knee,
channel west
Mara
of
said,
Betrayal.
her voice eerily
Please do not
calm.
repost it
Then
in
the
any
other
form.
knee. Then we'll see how much you like burning people out of their homes when you can't walk. You're crazy. Yeah, Mara smiled, and it felt like baring teeth. Mountain folk are like that. She kept the rifle trained on Webb as she moved to Elias's side. Dropped to her knees beside him, one hand going to his throat to check for a pulse. There. Faint but steady. He was alive. Mara. Elias's voice was barely a whisper. Run. Not without you. Can't walk. Bullet in my leg. Maybe worse. His hand found hers, squeezed weakly. You run. You survive. That's an order. I don't take orders anymore. Behind her, she could hear more men coming. The ones who'd recovered enough from the poison to give chase. They'd be here in minutes, and then it would be over. No escape, no clever tricks, just overwhelming numbers. Mara looked at the 3 men she'd driven back, looked at Elias bleeding on the ground, looked at the rifle in her hands, and the choices that had led her here. She'd run from her father's cabin to save her own life. She'd found sanctuary in this hollow, learned to heal and hurt and hope again. She'd discovered that she was capable of more than survival. She was capable of love, of loyalty, of standing her ground when everything in her screamed to flee. But standing her ground meant watching Elias die. Meant dying herself, probably, once the rest of Webb's men arrived. Unless... An idea sparked in her mind. Desperate, crazy, but possibly the only chance they had. Webb, she called out, you want this land so bad? Fine. You can have it. What? Webb emerged from behind a tree, suspicious. What are you talking about? I'm talking about a deal. You let us go, both of us, and I'll give you something worth more than this hollow. You've got nothing I want. Wrong. Mara's mind raced, assembling pieces of conversation, things Whitaker had said, opportunities she'd been too focused on survival to recognize. I know every medicinal plant in these mountains. Know which ones heal and which ones kill. Know where they grow, when to harvest them, how to prepare them. That clinic Whitaker's opening? It needs someone with that knowledge. Someone who can keep settlers alive when they're stupid enough to eat the wrong berries or drink bad water. Webb's eyes narrowed. Why would I care about that? Because healthy settlers pay more rent. Because sick ones die before they can improve the land. Because Whitaker told me himself the clinic needs help. Mara pressed her advantage. You let us walk away tonight. I'll work for your company. I'll teach your settlers. I'll make Greenville the safest, healthiest settlement in the territory. Think what that'll do for your investment. And if I just shoot you and take what I want? Then you get nothing. Knowledge dies with the person who holds it. Mara's voice was steel. And every settler who dies of bad water or poison plants, their families will know you had a chance to save them and chose revenge instead. See how that helps your business. The calculation was clear in Webb's face. Greed warring with spite, profit fighting pride. Finally, he spoke. You work for us for 5 years. Full time. No running back to this hollow, and Boone stays in town where we can watch him. Any tricks, and the deal's off. 3 years, and Elias gets medical care, real care, from Dr. Morrison.
This
4
story
years.
was posted on the
And
channel
you pay
west
for his
of
care out of your
Betrayal.
wages.
Please do not
Mara wanted
repost
to argue,
it in
but
any
Elias
form.
was losing blood and time was running out. Deal. But I want it in writing, a contract, legal and binding. Webb actually laughed. You don't trust me? Smart girl. He stepped forward, hand extended. We'll draw up the papers tomorrow, but right now we shake on it. Your word against mine. Mara looked at his hand, looked at Elias. Looked at the future she was choosing. Not freedom, not the life she'd wanted, but survival. Complicated, compromised, but survival nonetheless. She took Webb's hand. His grip was too tight, his smile too victorious. Welcome to civilization, mountain girl. Hope you don't regret it. Mara met his eyes with all the cold fury of a winter storm. I already do. The deputy and the other men emerged from the trees, supporting their sick companions. They looked at Mara with a mixture of fear and grudging respect. She'd poisoned them, shot at them, and somehow negotiated her way out of execution. "Get a wagon," Webb ordered. "We need to get Boone to town before he bleeds out. Can't have him dying before we've got the girl's signature on that contract." They fashioned a stretcher from branches and coats, lifting Elias as gently as men who'd tried to kill him 20 minutes ago could manage. He was conscious but fading, his face gray in the torchlight. "You shouldn't have," he whispered as they loaded him onto the stretcher. "Should have let me go." "Not how this works." Mara walked beside him, her hand gripping his. "You saved me. Now I save you. That's fair." "Nothing about this is fair." "No, but it's survival. You taught me that." The journey back to town took hours. Mara walked the whole way, refusing the offer of a horse, keeping pace with the wagon that carried Elias. Her feet hurt, her body ached, her heart felt like it had been ripped out and stuffed back in wrong, but she kept walking. Dawn was breaking when they reached Greenville, a sprawling collection of buildings that seemed enormous after months in the hollow. The main street was already busy with wagons and workers. The settlement was growing, Mara realized, expanding, consuming. They took Elias to the clinic, a sturdy building near the center of town. Dr. Morrison, a tired-looking man in his 40s, emerged at the commotion. "What happened?" "Gunshot," the deputy said. "Leg wound, maybe internal bleeding. Can you save him?" Morrison's eyes went to Mara, taking in her mountain clothes, her wild hair, the dried blood on her hands. "Who's this?" "Your new assistant," Webb said smoothly. "Part of the arrangement. She works for you, helps with the clinic. In exchange, you treat this man." "I don't need—" "You need help, Morrison. I've seen your books. You're drowning in patience and paperwork. This girl knows mountain medicine. She'll be useful." Webb's tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. Morrison looked at Mara again, longer this time. "You know plants? Herbs? Everything that grows in these mountains. Can you read?" "Enough." Morrison sighed, but nodded. "Fine, but she follows my orders, not yours, Webb. This is a medical facility, not a company office. As long as she shows up and works, I don't care who gives the orders." Webb turned to Mara. "I'll have the contract drawn up by tomorrow. Sign it, and we're square. Break it." "I know. You'll hunt us down." Mara's voice was flat. "I get it." Webb smiled. "Good. Welcome to Greenville." He left, taking most of his men with him. The deputy remained, along with two others clearly assigned to make sure Mara didn't try to run. Morrison worked on Elias for 3 hours. Mara watched through the doorway, not allowed in the surgery room but unable to look away. She saw Morrison probe the wound, extract the bullet, stitch the torn flesh. Saw Elias's face contort with pain even through the laudanum Morrison had given him. Finally, Morrison emerged, washing blood from his hands. "He'll live. Lost a lot of blood, and the wound's going to trouble him for months. But he'll live." Morrison looked at Mara. "You did this?" "The shooting." "No, your deputy did. I'm the one who made sure Elias didn't die in the woods." "By negotiating with the man who wanted you both dead." "By doing what I had to." Morrison studied her with those tired, knowing eyes. "You're going to fit right in here. This whole town runs on people doing what they have to instead of what they want." He gestured to a small room off the main clinic floor. "That's where you'll sleep. There's a basin for washing and a trunk for your things. You start work tomorrow at dawn." "Can I see him, Elias?" "Not tonight. He needs rest and you need to clean up. You look like you've been through a war." Mara wanted to argue, but exhaustion was finally catching up with her. She nodded and let Morrison show her to the room. It was small and plain, but clean. A narrow bed, a single window, a chair. After months in the cabin's cozy warmth, it felt sterile, empty. Mara sat on the bed and tried to feel something. Relief that they'd survived, anger at the choice she'd been forced to make, fear for the future. But all she felt was numb. She'd run from her father's cabin and found sanctuary. She'd learned to heal and fight and hope. She'd stood her ground when everything told her to flee, and in the end she'd traded one kind of prison for another. Not the prison of violence her father had built, but the prison of obligation, of debt, of contracts written in her own desperation. Mara lay back on the narrow bed and stared at the
This
ceiling.
story was posted
Somewhere
on
in
the
this
channel
building,
west of
Elias
Betrayal.
was sleeping off
Please
the
do not
surgery,
repost it
dreaming
in any
whatever
form.
dreams wounded men had. Tomorrow, she would sign away 4 years of her life to a company she despised. She would learn to survive in a town instead of mountains, among strangers instead of silence. But they were alive. That had to count for something. Outside, Greenville woke fully to the new day. Mara closed her eyes and tried to imagine a future where this bargain didn't destroy her. She failed. But she'd learned over 17 years of survival that sometimes failing to imagine a future didn't mean that future couldn't come. Sometimes it just meant you had to walk forward blind, trusting that the path would reveal itself one step at a time. So that's what she'd do. One step at a time, even if every step felt like walking away from home. Dawn came too early and too loud. Mara woke to the sound of wagons rattling past, voices calling in the street, the general cacophony of a town that never quite slept. For a disoriented moment, she reached for the rifle that should have been beside her bed, panic spiking through her chest. Then memory crashed back. The hollow. The fight. The deal. She was in Greenville now, property of the settlement company for the next 4 years, bound by a contract she hadn't even signed yet. A knock on the door made her jump. "You awake?" Dr. Morrison's voice, gruff but not unkind. "Sun's up. Work starts now." Mara dressed quickly in the clothes she'd worn yesterday, still stained with mud and blood, and emerged to find Morrison already moving through the clinic with efficient purpose. 3 patients waited on benches in the front room, an older woman with a cough, a man cradling a bandaged hand, a child burning with fever in his mother's arms. "Coffee's on the stove," Morrison said without looking up from the ledger he was writing in. "Drink it fast. Then I need you to change the dressings on the patients in the back ward, inventory the medicine cabinet, and boil water, lots of water. We're low on clean bandages, and I've got a surgery scheduled for noon." Mara poured herself coffee, bitter and strong enough to strip paint, and got to work. The back ward held 6 beds, 4 of them occupied. 2 men with broken bones set in splints, a woman recovering from childbirth fever, and Elias propped up against pillows, his face still pale but his eyes clear. "You look like hell," he said when Mara approached his bed. "You look worse." She set down her supplies and pulled back the blanket to check his bandages. "How's the leg?" "Hurts like the devil. Morrison says I might walk with a limp, but I'll walk." Elias caught her hand. "You shouldn't have done it, Mara. Shouldn't have traded yourself for me. We've had this argument. You lost. This ain't losing. This is you throwing away your freedom because an old man was too stubborn to run when he had the chance." Mara began unwrapping the bandage, her movements gentle but firm. "My freedom was gone the moment Webb showed up with torches. At least this way we're both alive. That's more than we had yesterday." The wound beneath the bandage was red and angry but clean. Morrison had done good work. Mara cleaned it with carbolic solution, something she'd never used in the mountains but recognized from the bottles in Morrison's cabinet, and applied fresh dressing. 4 years, Elias said quietly. That's a long time to be someone's property. "I was my father's property for 17. I survived that. I'll survive this." "This is different. You had no choice with your father. You chose this." "Exactly. I chose it. That makes all the difference." Mara tied off the bandage. "Besides, maybe it won't be so bad."
This story was
Morrison
posted
seems
on the
decent
channel
enough,
west of
and I'll learn
Betrayal.
things here.
Please do not
Real
repost
medicine,
it
not
in
just
any
mountain
form.
remedies. And when the 4 years are up, what then? Mara didn't have an answer for that. She finished with Elias's wound and moved to the next patient, grateful for the excuse to avoid his eyes. The work consumed her. There was always something that needed doing, bandages to change, floors to scrub, medicines to prepare. Morrison taught her as they worked, showing her the proper way to set a broken bone, how to recognize the signs of infection, which medicines worked and which were snake oil sold by traveling charlatans. "Mountain folk have good instincts," Morrison said one afternoon as they mixed a poultice for a settler's infected toe. "But instinct only goes so far. You need to understand why things work, not just that they do. Why does it matter if the treatment works? It matters because someday you'll face something you've never seen before, something your instincts can't guide you through, That's when understanding saves lives. He handed her a jar of dried comfrey root. Grind this fine. We'll need it for the new family that came in this morning. The father's got a gash on his arm from clearing timber. The new family turned out to be a young couple with 3 small children, all of them thin and exhausted from the journey west. The father, barely older than Mara, had a deep laceration running from his elbow to his wrist. "How long ago did this happen?" Morrison asked, examining the wound. 3 days? Maybe 4. The man's voice was tight with pain. "Didn't seem so bad at first." "It's infected now. I'll need to clean it out, and it's going to hurt." Morrison looked at Mara. "Get the carbolic and the sutures, and bring laudanum. He's going to need it." Mara worked alongside Morrison as he debrided the wound, her hands steady despite the man's groans. She'd seen worse in the hollow, had caused worse with her poisoned stew, but there was something different about this. This was healing instead of hurting, building instead of destroying. When it was done and the man was resting with his arm freshly bandaged, Morrison washed his hands and turned to Mara. "You did good work today. You've got steady hands and you don't flinch. That's rare." "Had a good teacher in the mountains. Elias showed me how to dress wounds, set bones, basic things." "He taught you more than basics. Most people freeze the first time they see that much blood." Morrison dried his hands. "You ever think about doing this permanent? Being a healer, I mean, after your contract's up?" The question caught Mara off guard. She'd been so focused on surviving the next 4 years that she hadn't thought beyond them, hadn't let herself imagine a future where she had choices again. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Think about it. The territory's growing. Always need good doctors, especially ones who understand both town medicine and mountain ways." Morrison paused. "And for what it's worth, I'm sorry about how you ended up here. Webb's a bastard, and what he did to you and Boone wasn't right. But you work for him anyway." "I work for the patients. Webb just signs my pay vouchers." Morrison's expression was tired. "We all make compromises to survive, girl. The trick is making sure the compromises don't cost more than we can afford." That night, after the clinic closed and the patients were settled, Mara sat with Elias in the back ward. He was healing faster than Morrison had expected, already able to sit up without help and take short walks around the room. "I saw Webb today," Elias said. "He came by to check on me, make sure his investment was still alive." "What did he want?" "To gloat, mostly. Said the papers for the hollow are going through. The cabin's being torn down next week. They're building a lumber mill there." Elias's voice was carefully neutral, but Mara heard the grief underneath. 30 years, gone in a month. Mara took his hand. The cabin was just wood. What mattered was what it represented. Safety, healing. Those things don't disappear just because the building does. "You sound like Sarah. She used to say home wasn't a place, it was a feeling." Elias squeezed her hand. "I'm glad you're here, even if I wish you weren't. Does that make sense?" "Yeah, it does." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of Greenville settling down for the night. So different from the hollow's quiet, but not entirely unwelcome. The weeks blurred together. Mara fell into the rhythm of clinic work, learning to navigate the strange new world of town medicine. She met settlers from back east who'd never seen a mountain, met prospectors chasing gold dreams and getting dysentery instead, met women who'd left everything behind for the promise of free land and found only hardship. She helped them all, mixing the knowledge Elias had taught her with what Morrison showed her. Yarrow for bleeding, willow bark for fever, carbolic for infection. Her hands learned the weight of different tools, the tension of sutures, the exact pressure needed to set a bone without causing more damage. And slowly, carefully, she began to build something that looked almost like a life. 2 months after the night in the hollow, Webb summoned her to his office in the settlement company building. Mara went with dread coiling in her stomach, expecting more demands, more compromises. Instead, she found Silas Whitaker waiting alongside Webb. "Miss Holloway." Whitaker stood when she entered, a courtesy Webb didn't bother with. "Thank you for coming." "Didn't know I had a choice." "You don't," Webb said flatly. "But we can pretend you do. Makes things more pleasant." Whitaker shot him a look of disgust before turning back to Mara. "I heard about what happened, the fight at the hollow. The deal you made. He paused. I want to apologize. What Webb did was not authorized by me. I would never have approved burning people out of their homes. But you approved taking the land. Yes, because I still believed that development can benefit everyone if it's done right. But there's a difference between legal acquisition and violence. Whitaker pulled out a folder. I've been reviewing your contract. It's unconscionable. 4 years of indentured service in exchange for medical care that should have been provided regardless. Webb leaned forward. We had an agreement. You had an extortion scheme. There's a difference. Whitaker opened the folder. I'm rewriting the terms, 2 years instead of 4. Fair wages from day one, not just room and board. And at the end of that period, if you choose to continue working at the clinic, you'll be paid the same rate as any qualified medical assistant in the territory. Mara stared at him, not quite believing what she was hearing. Why? Because I'm trying to build a settlement, not a prison. Because word gets around about how companies treat people, and I want the word about Greenville to be good. Whitaker met her eyes. And because what Webb did to you reminds me too much of why I left the city in the first place. Power corrupting people who should know better. Webb's face had gone red. You can't just, I own 51% of this company. I absolutely can. Whitaker slid the new contract across the desk. Read it. Take your time. If you have questions, ask. But this is my final offer, and it's considerably better than what you had. Mara read slowly, sounding out the legal language with the reading skills Elias had taught her. Whitaker was right. The new terms were dramatically better. 2 years instead of 4. Real wages. A clear end date with no hidden clauses. There's got to be a catch, she said finally. No catch. Just one request. Whitaker leaned back in his chair. The clinic's expanding. Morrison can't handle it alone, even with you helping. I want to bring in more staff, turn it into a real hospital. But that requires someone who understands both town medicine and mountain ways. Someone who can teach settlers how to survive here without getting themselves killed. You want me to teach? Eventually, yes. Once you've learned enough from Morrison. We're getting 50 new families a month now. Most of them don't know poison oak from blackberries. They're going to need someone who can bridge that gap. Whitaker paused. I know you have no reason to trust me. I know my company took your home. But I'm asking you to consider that maybe, just maybe, we can build something here that's worth the cost. Mara looked at Webb, who was practically vibrating with suppressed rage. Looked at Whitaker, whose expression was open and earnest. Looked at the contract that offered her something she'd stopped believing in. A future that wasn't just survival. I want one more thing, she said. Name it. Elias. When he's healed enough to leave the clinic, he needs somewhere to live, and I want to be able to visit him whenever I'm not working. Done. We've got cabins for workers. He can have one. And he's not obligated to work for the company. He's free to do whatever he wants. Whitaker smiled faintly. He's already free. I'm not Webb. I don't deal in forced labor. Mara picked up the pen, dipped it in ink, and signed her name at the bottom of the contract. The letters were shaky. Her handwriting was still rough, but they were hers. She was still bound, still owned her labor to the company. But the chains were lighter now, and she could see their end. That had to count for something. The next 6 months taught Mara that growth and pain were often the same thing. She learned to splint compound fractures and deliver breech babies. Learned which mushrooms could cure infection and which would stop
This
a heart.
story was posted on the channel
Learned to
West
read
of
medical
Betrayal.
texts Morrison
Please
lent
do
her,
not repost
expanding
it
her
in any
vocabulary
form.
beyond what Elias had taught. But she also learned the limits of healing. She watched a child die from scarlet fever despite everything Morrison tried. Watched a young mother bleed out after childbirth because the damage was too severe. Watched an old man waste away from consumption, his lungs filling with fluid no medicine could drain. You can't save everyone, Morrison told her after a particularly brutal week where they'd lost 3 patients. The sooner you accept that, the longer you'll last in this work. How do you accept it? Mara asked. How do you watch people die and just keep going? By remembering the ones you do save. By knowing that every person you help is one less family destroyed by grief. Morrison poured them both coffee. And by understanding that healing isn't always about curing. Sometimes it's about making the dying easier. giving people dignity in their last moments. That matters too. Mara thought about her mother, who died without dignity, alone except for a 9-year-old daughter who couldn't help her. Thought about how different it might have been if someone like Morrison had been there. Someone who knew how to ease pain instead of just enduring it. Yeah, she said quietly. It does matter. Elias recovered enough to move into one of the worker cabins on the edge of town. It was small but sturdy, with a garden plot he immediately began cultivating. Mara visited him every Sunday, her one guaranteed day off from the clinic. You're looking more like a town girl every week, Elias observed one afternoon as they worked in his garden together. Walking different, talking different. Is that bad? No, just different. He pulled a weed and tossed it aside. You're becoming who you were always meant to be, just took losing everything to find it. We didn't lose everything. We're both alive. You've got this place. I've got work I'm actually good at. You've got more than that. You've got respect. I hear people talking about you in town. The mountain girl who can cure anything. The healer who saved 3 children from diphtheria last month. Mara felt her face heat. I didn't do it alone. Morrison says you diagnosed it before he did. Says you're the best assistant he's ever had. Elias straightened, wincing slightly as his bad leg protested. Your mama would be proud. You took all that pain she couldn't escape and turned it into something that helps people. The words hit harder than Mara expected. She'd spent so long thinking of her mother as a cautionary tale, a woman broken by the wrong choices, that she'd never considered what her mother might think of who Mara had become. I wish she could see this, Mara said. See that running toward something better actually worked. Maybe she can. Who knows what the dead see? Elias smiled. But I see it. And I'm proud of you, girl. Proud of who you've become. That night, walking back to the clinic through Greenville's lamplit streets, Mara let herself feel something she'd been holding at bay for months. Hope. Not the desperate, fragile hope of survival, but something stronger. The hope that maybe her life could be more than just escaping her past, that maybe she could build something that mattered. The feeling lasted exactly 3 days. Then Samuel Holloway came to town. Mara was in the clinic's front room, treating a settler's infected blister, when the door opened and her father walked in. He froze. The room spun. For a moment she was 9 years old again, watching him beat her mother. 12 years old, hiding in the corner while he raged. 17, running barefoot into the snow. He looked older, thinner. His beard was longer and streaked with more gray, but his eyes, those cold, cruel eyes, were exactly the same. He didn't recognize her at first. Why would he? The broken girl who'd fled his cabin bore little resemblance to the young woman in a clean dress with her hair pinned up, standing in a doctor's office like she belonged there. Help you? Morrison's voice, carefully neutral from behind her. Samuel's gaze swept the room, dismissive. Looking for my daughter, heard she might be in town. Red hair, green eyes, probably using the name Mara Holloway. The settler on the bench looked confused. Morrison's expression didn't change, but Mara felt him tense beside her. Why are you looking for her? Morrison asked. She's my daughter. That's reason enough. Samuel's voice carried the self-righteous tone Mara remembered too well. Ran off near about a year ago, time she came home. And if she doesn't want to come home? Samuel's face darkened. She's 17. Don't matter what she wants. The law says she belongs to me till she's 18. Mara found her voice. It came out steadier than she felt. I'm not going anywhere with you. Samuel's head snapped toward her. Recognition dawned slowly, followed by something that might have been surprise or anger or both. Mara? He took a step forward. What in the hell? You're alive. Where have you been? Away from you, and I'm staying away. You're coming home. Right now. He reached for her arm. Morrison stepped between them, his hand going to the scalpel on the nearby tray. Touch her and you'll regret it. This is family business. This is my clinic. You're trespassing, and the young lady just said she's not going with you. Morrison's voice was ice. So I suggest you leave before I have the deputy escort you out. Samuel's face went purple. You got no right. Actually, I do. Miss Holloway is employed by the settlement company under legal contract. She's also 18 as of 2 months ago, which makes her a legal adult. So whatever claim you think you have on her, it's void. It was a lie. Mara wouldn't turn 18 for another 4 months. But Samuel didn't know that, and Morrison delivered it with such conviction that even Mara almost believed it. Samuel's hands curled into fists. For a moment, Mara thought he might attack anyway. Law be damned. She saw the violence coiling in him, the same rage that had defined her childhood. Then Webb appeared in the doorway. Problem here, Morrison? Morrison didn't take his eyes off Samuel. This man was just leaving. Webb looked at Samuel, then at Mara, and something calculating crossed his face. You're Samuel Holloway, the one from up near the ridge. That's right, and this is my daughter, your adult daughter who works for my company and lives under my protection. Webb's smile was cold. You've got 10 seconds to leave town. After that, I'll have you arrested for trespassing and threatening a company employee. You can't do that. I own this town. I can do whatever I want. Webb stepped aside, gesturing to the door. 10, 9, 8. Samuel looked at Mara one last time. The hatred in his eyes was a living thing, hot and vicious. This ain't over. Yeah, Mara said quietly. It is. He left, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Mara watched through the window as he mounted his horse and rode out of town, his shoulders rigid with fury. When he was gone, she collapsed into the nearest chair, her legs suddenly unable to hold her weight. You all right? Morrison's hand was gentle on her shoulder. No, but I will be. Mara looked up at Webb, who was still standing in the doorway. Thank you. I never thought I'd say that to you, but thank you. Webb shrugged. You're a company asset. Of course I protect you. But his voice was slightly less harsh than usual. Besides, I know Samuel Holloway's type. Men like that think they own everything they touch. Someone needed to show him he's wrong. After Webb left, Morrison pulled up a chair beside Mara. You want to talk about it? Not really. Fair enough, but if he comes back, he won't. He's a coward at heart. Only hits people who can't hit back. Mara stood, forcing her legs to be steady. I should get back to work. That settler's blister still needs treating. Mara. I'm fine, really. She managed to smile. I've been running from him my whole life. It feels good to finally stand still and watch him be the one who has to leave. Morrison studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, but if you need to talk, I know where to find you. That night, Mara couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the confrontation in her mind. She'd stood up to her father, had watched him back down, had claimed her own life in front of witnesses. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like the calm before a storm. She was right to worry. 3 days later, news reached Greenville that Samuel Holloway's cabin had burned to the ground. The neighbors who found it said it looked like Samuel had been drinking, knocked over a lamp, and couldn't get out before the smoke overcame him. They found his body in the ruins. The deputy came to the clinic to tell Mara personally. I'm sorry for your loss, he said, though his tone suggested he wasn't sorry at all. I know you and your father had a complicated relationship. Mara felt nothing. No grief, no relief. Just a vast emptiness where her father had lived in her mind for 17 years. What happens now? She asked. There'll be an inquest, but it's pretty clear what happened. Tragic accident. Unless you want to contest that finding? Mara thought about the truth, about the years of abuse, about her mother's death, about running barefoot through the snow while her father chased her with murder in his eyes. No,
This story
she
was
said.
posted on the
It
channel
was an
West of
accident.
Betrayal.
The
Please
deputy
do not
nodded and
repost it
left.
in any form.
Mara went back to work, her hands steady, her mind quiet. That evening, Elias came to the clinic. He found Mara in the supply room organizing bandages. I heard, he said simply. Yeah. You all right? Mara set down the bandages and turned to face him. I don't know what I am. I should feel something, right? He was my father, but all I feel is empty. That's normal. Grief's complicated when it's mixed with relief. Elias pulled her into a hug. You're allowed to be glad he's gone. That don't make you a bad person. How do you know? Because I know you. You're one of the best people I've ever met. You took all that pain and turned it into healing. That's who you are now. Not the scared girl who ran from her father, not the survivor who had to poison men to live. You're Mara Holloway, healer, and that's enough. Mara buried her face in his shoulder and finally let herself cry. Not for her father, for the child she'd been, for her mother, for all the years of fear that were finally over. When the tears stopped, she felt lighter, cleansed, free. The inquest ruled Samuel Holloway's death an accident. Mara didn't attend. There was no funeral. Mountain folk didn't bother with such things for men like Samuel. He was buried in an unmarked grave at the edge of the settlement, and the world moved on. Mara moved on with it. She threw herself into the clinic work with renewed purpose, helped Morrison expand the operation into a proper hospital, taught classes on mountain medicine to new settlers, became known throughout the territory as the girl who could cure what others couldn't. And slowly, carefully, she began to understand what Whitaker had meant about building something worth the cost. Greenville wasn't the Hollow. It was loud and crowded and full of people whose names she'd never learn, but it was also full of opportunity, of growth, of the chance to matter in ways she never could have alone in the mountains. Her 2-year contract ended on a crisp October morning. Morrison handed her the release papers himself, along with something else. A job offer. "Stay on," he said. "Full salary, full partnership. We'll call it Morrison and Holloway Clinic. You've earned it." Mara looked at the papers, at the offer, at the life she'd built from the ashes of everything she'd lost. "Yeah," she said, smiling, "I'll stay." The years that followed taught Mara that healing was never a straight line. Morrison and Holloway Clinic became a fixture in Greenville's expanding landscape, a place where mountain folk and settlers alike came seeking remedies for ailments both common and strange. Mara learned to navigate between two worlds, the scientific precision Morrison demanded and the intuitive wisdom Elias had taught her in the Hollow. She discovered they weren't opposites but complements, two languages describing the same truth. The work was relentless. Greenville swelled from a rough settlement into a proper town, bringing typhoid outbreaks and construction accidents, childbirths gone wrong, and limbs crushed by falling timber. Mara stitched and splinted and dosed, her hands growing more confident with each patient saved, each crisis weathered. But it was the losses that shaped her most. The children who died despite everything she tried. The mothers who bled out before help could arrive. The men broken by their own recklessness, gone before Mara could even begin to mend them. "You're carrying too much," Morrison told her one evening after they'd lost a young woman to infection following surgery. "You can't save everyone, Mara. I've told you that before." Knowing it and accepting it are different things. Mara scrubbed dried blood from under her fingernails, her movements mechanical. She had 3 children. The youngest is barely 2. What happens to them now? The same thing that happened to you. They survive. They adapt. They find people who care. Morrison's voice was gentle but firm. "You can't fix every tragedy. You can only do the work in front of you." Mara wanted to argue, but exhaustion made the words stick in her throat. She was 22 now, no longer the frightened girl who'd stumbled into Morrison's clinic. But some days the weight of accumulated grief made her feel ancient. She left the clinic that night and walked to Elias's cabin on the edge of town. He was sitting on the porch, pipe smoke curling around his silver hair, looking out at the mountains that still called to him, even after all these years. "Lost one?" he asked without preamble when Mara climbed the steps. "Yeah." Elias shifted over on the bench, making room. Mara sat, and they watched the sun set behind the ridges in silence. This had become their ritual, shared grief requiring no words, just presence. Finally, Elias spoke. "You remember what I told you once? About how sometimes healing ain't about curing? Making the dying easier, giving them dignity. That's part of it, but there's more." He tapped out his pipe. "Sometimes healing is what you do for the ones left behind. The children you're worried about? They'll need someone to check on them, make sure they're eating right, not getting sick. That's healing too." Mara leaned her head against his shoulder. "When did you get so wise?" "Same time as you. We just took different paths to the same place." He squeezed her hand. "You're doing good work, girl. Don't let the losses make you forget the saves." The next morning, Mara made good on Elias's suggestion. She visited the dead woman's family, bringing food and medicine, checking the children for signs of illness. The grandmother thanked her with tears in her eyes. "You were there at the end," the old woman said. My daughter, she wasn't alone. That means something. It did mean something. Mara held on to that truth through the hard days that followed, through the inevitable failures and the small victories that made them bearable. 3 years after she'd signed her partnership with Morrison, on a cold November morning, a young girl appeared at the clinic door. She was maybe 13, thin as a wire, with haunted eyes that Mara recognized immediately. The girl had a split lip and bruises on her arms and the distinctive pattern of finger marks. She held herself with the careful stillness of someone who'd learned that drawing attention meant inviting pain. "Help you?" Mara asked gently. The girl's voice came out barely above a whisper. "I need somewhere to stay, just for tonight, please." Mara saw herself in that girl. Saw the desperate hope warring with the certainty that hope was a luxury people like them couldn't afford. Saw the exact moment when the girl prepared to run if Mara said no. "Come inside me," Mara said. "You're safe here." The girl's name was Clara. She'd run from a father who made Samuel Holloway look merciful. Over the next few hours, as Mara tended her wounds and listened to her story, the parallels became almost unbearable. Different details, same nightmare. "I'll go back tomorrow," Clara said as Mara bandaged her ribs. "I just needed one night where I didn't have to—" Her voice broke. "You don't have to go back." "I got nowhere else." "Yes, you do." Mara finished the bandaging and met Clara's eyes. "You can stay here. Work at the clinic, learn healing. I'll teach you everything I know, but you have to make a choice. Right now, run towards something better or stay trapped in what you know." Clara stared at her, disbelieving. "You don't even know me." "I know enough. I know you're strong enough to run, brave enough to ask for help, smart enough to recognize that survival isn't the same as living." Mara took the girl's hands. "Someone gave me that choice once. Changed everything. I'm giving it to you now." The girl's facade cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "What if I'm not strong enough?" "Then we'll make you strong. Together." Clara stayed. Morrison grumbled about having another mouth to feed, but softened when he saw how quickly the girl learned. Elias took her under his wing, teaching her the mountain knowledge he'd taught Mara years before. Whitaker, in a rare show of humanity, arranged legal protection to keep Clara's father from reclaiming her. And Mara discovered something she hadn't expected, that teaching healed her in ways being healed never had. Every skill she passed to Clara was a weight lifted from her own shoulders. Every moment of patience she showed the frightened girl was kindness she gave to her younger self, retroactively. "You're good at this," Morrison observed one afternoon, watching Mara guide Clara through a difficult suturing procedure. "Better than I was. You've got patience." "I know what she needs. That makes it easier." "It's more than that. You understand that healing isn't just about the wound. It's about the person carrying it." Morrison smiled. "You've become exactly what this town needs, Mara, what all of us need." The words settled in Mara's chest like a benediction. She'd spent so long thinking of herself as broken, as damaged by her past, that she'd never considered she might be exactly right for this work because of what she'd survived, not despite it. That winter was brutal. Snow piled high in the streets. The clinic overflowed with frostbite cases and influenza. Mara and Morrison worked 18-hour days, with Clara helping however she could. Elias came down with pneumonia. It started as a simple cough, the kind that plagued everyone in winter. But Elias was 73 now, his body worn down by decades of hard living. The cough deepened. Fever set in.
This story was
Within
posted
days,
on
he
the
was too
channel
weak to
West
leave
of
his bed.
Betrayal.
Mara
Please do not
moved into his
repost
cabin,
it in
sleeping
any
in a
form.
chair beside him, monitoring his breathing through the long nights. Morrison visited daily, bringing medicines that helped but couldn't cure. They both knew what was coming, even if neither said it aloud. "You should rest," Elias wheezed one night when Mara was changing his fever-damp sheets. "Can't help nobody if you collapse. I'm not leaving you." Stubborn girl. But he smiled. "Just like your mama, just like Sarah." "Tell me about her," Mara said, tucking fresh blankets around him. "About Sarah, you never talk about her much." Elias's eyes went distant, remembering. "She was fierce, that's the word. Not mean, just fierce in her love. When Emma was born, Sarah looked at her and said, 'I'll burn the world down before I let anything hurt you.' And she meant it." His voice caught. Then the fever took Emma anyway, and I watched that fierceness turn inward. She died 6 months later. Hart just gave out from grief. I'm sorry. Don't be. I got 30 good years with her, and 10 years with Emma. And then I got you. Elias reached for Mara's hand. You know what Sarah would have said about you? She would have said you were proof that sometimes the broken things can be fixed, that running toward kindness works. Elias, let me finish. I'm dying, girl. We both know it. Let an old man have his say. He squeezed her hand with what strength he had left. You saved my life when you made that deal with Webb. Gave me 5 extra years I wouldn't have had, but more than that, you gave me purpose. Watching you grow from that terrified child into the woman you are now, that's been the greatest gift of my life. Mara's vision blurred with tears. You saved me first. Everything I am, everything I've built, it started with you. No, it started with you choosing to live, choosing to run, choosing to keep running until you found something worth stopping for. Elias's breathing was labored now. Promise me something. Anything. Don't stop. Don't ever stop becoming who you're meant to be. And when other broken people come to you, and they will because you're the kind of light that draws the wounded, you give them what I gave you. Space. Safety. The chance to heal. I promise. Elias smiled and closed his eyes. Good girl, now. Let me sleep. I'm tired. He slipped into unconsciousness that night and never woke. Morrison confirmed it 3 days later. Pneumonia had progressed to organ failure. Elias's body, which had survived so much, had finally decided it was time to rest. They buried him on the ridge above town, near where the hollow used to be before the lumber mill swallowed it. Mara stood at the grave with Morrison, Clara, and a surprising number of townspeople who'd come to respect the quiet mountain man. Even Whitaker attended, hat in hand, offering genuine condolences. He was a good man, Whitaker said. Better than most I've known. Yeah, Mara replied, her voice thick. He was. After the burial, Mara walked alone to where the hollow had been. The mill was silent on Sundays, and she could almost pretend it wasn't there. Could almost see the cabin as it had been, smoke curling from the chimney, Elias on the porch teaching her to read the weather. Thank you, she whispered to the empty air, for everything. The wind through the bare trees sounded almost like a reply. Grief settled over Mara like a familiar coat, heavy but not crushing. She'd learned to carry it alongside her work, to let it inform her compassion without drowning her in sorrow. Clara needed her. The clinic needed her. The endless stream of patients needed her, and she discovered that being needed was its own kind of healing. 5 years after Elias's death, Mara was 30 years old and the most respected healer in 3 counties. The clinic had expanded into a full hospital, with 4 doctors working under Morrison's guidance and Mara's innovative techniques. She'd written a manual on mountain medicine that was being used to train healers across the territory. She'd testified before the territorial legislature about the need for better public health measures. She'd become, against all odds, important. But importance came with complications. Webb had died 2 years earlier, a heart attack that surprised no one who'd seen his temper, and Whitaker now ran the settlement company alone. He'd proven himself to be exactly what he'd claimed, a businessman with principles, someone who believed development and decency weren't mutually exclusive. He also, Mara had recently realized, was in love with her. It showed in small ways. The way he always asked about her work when they passed on the street, the books on medicine he had shipped from back east and delivered to the hospital with no explanation. The way his face lit up when she entered a room, then carefully schooled itself to professional neutrality. Mara didn't know what to do with it. She liked Whitaker well enough, respected him even. He'd kept his promises, had run Greenville with fairness and vision. The town had prospered under his leadership, growing from a rough settlement into a place with schools and churches and actual paved streets. But love. Mara had spent so long focused on survival, then on healing, that romance felt like a language she'd never learned. Morrison, of course, noticed. He's going to ask you to dinner eventually, Morrison said one evening as they reviewed patient files. You know that, right? I know. And you're going to say... Mara set down the file she'd been reading. I don't know. He's a good man, but I'm not sure I'm capable of. She gestured vaguely. That. Why not? Because everything in my life has been about survival or service. I don't know how to just be with someone, to trust them that completely. Morrison studied her over his spectacles. You trusted Elias. That was different. He was someone who saw you at your worst and stayed anyway. Someone who taught you that kindness wasn't a trap. Someone who made you believe you were worth saving. Morrison's voice was gentle. Whitaker's not Elias, and he never will be. But he might be someone who could help you build a different kind of life, if you let him. Before Mara could respond, Clara burst into the office. There's been an accident at the mill. Multiple injuries. They're bringing them now. The conversation was forgotten in the rush of preparing for casualties. 7 men came in over the next hour, victims of a collapsed support beam. Mara worked alongside the other doctors, setting bones and stitching wounds, losing herself in the familiar rhythm of crisis medicine. 3 of the men died despite their best efforts. The survivors would heal, but slowly. As Mara scrubbed blood from her hands hours later, she thought about Morrison's words, about the possibility of a life that wasn't defined by emergency and loss, a life with space for something softer. It was a terrifying thought. The next Sunday, Whitaker appeared at Mara's small house. She'd moved out of the hospital quarters 2 years ago, finally able to afford her own space, carrying flowers and wearing an expression of determined nervousness. I brought these, he said, holding out the bouquet. They're from my garden. I thought, well, I wasn't sure what to think, actually. Mara took the flowers, touched despite herself. They're beautiful. Thank you. May I come in? I'd like to talk to you, if you're not too tired. She let him in, made tea, and they sat in her small parlor like 2 people navigating unfamiliar territory, which Mara supposed they were. Whitaker cleared his throat. I'm not good at this. Building a settlement, negotiating contracts, managing logistics. Those I can do. But talking to someone, He stopped, started again. Mara, I've admired you since the day you stood up to Webb with nothing but a rifle and mountain wisdom. I've watched you build something extraordinary here. And I've come to realize that I don't just admire you, I care for you deeply. Mara's heart hammered against her ribs. Silas, I'm not asking for an answer right now. I know you've been through things that make trust difficult. I know I represent the company that took your home, even if I tried to make it right. But I'm asking if you'd consider letting me court you properly. Dinner, conversation, getting to know each other outside of business. He smiled ruefully. I promise I'm more interesting than I seem at company meetings. Mara looked at this man who'd shown her more decency than most, who'd rewritten her contract when he didn't have to, who'd protected Clara when it would have been easier to look away, who'd helped Greenville become a place where people like her could thrive instead of just survive. All right, she heard herself say. Dinner, conversation. We'll see where it goes. The relief on Whitaker's face was almost comical. Really? You mean it? I mean it. But Silas, I come with complications. I'm not some sweet town girl who'll be content making a home and raising babies. I have work, important work. That won't change. I wouldn't want it to. The world needs healers more than it needs housewives. He stood, moving toward the door. How about Saturday? There's a new restaurant that opened on Main Street. Nothing fancy, but the food's supposed to be good. Saturday works. After he left,
This
Mara
story was
sat in her
posted
parlor
on the
holding
channel
flowers,
West of
trying to
Betrayal.
process what
Please
had
do
just
not
happened.
repost it
She'd
in any
agreed to be
form.
courted, to open herself to the possibility of something beyond work and duty. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, preparing to jump. The courtship unfolded slowly, carefully, like 2 people learning a complicated dance. Whitaker proved surprisingly thoughtful. He asked about her work, listened to her stories about difficult cases, never expected her to be anything other than what she was. He made her laugh, which Mara discovered she liked. He challenged her intellectually, which she liked even more. And gradually, almost without noticing, Mara found herself falling in love. It wasn't the desperate intensity she'd read about in books. It was quieter, steadier. The comfort of knowing someone would be there. The pleasure of sharing small moments. The trust that built slowly, one honest conversation at a time. A year into their courtship, Whitaker proposed, not with grand gestures or public declarations, but privately, in Mara's parlor, with words that acknowledged everything they'd both been through. "I know you value your independence," he said. "I know you've built a life that's entirely your own. I'm not asking you to give that up. I'm asking if you'd let me be part of it. Partner, not master. Equal, not owner." Mara thought about her mother, who'd married seeking protection and found prison instead. Thought about the girl she'd been, who'd run from one kind of bondage only to negotiate herself into another. But she also thought about who she'd become, strong enough to set terms, confident enough to demand respect, wise enough to know the difference between partnership and possession. "Yes," she said, "but I want it in writing, a legal agreement that my work remains mine, my income is my own, and this marriage is an alliance of equals. Can you accept that?" Whitaker smiled. "I'd expect nothing less. We'll have the lawyers draw it up." They married in the spring, a small ceremony attended by Morrison, Clara, and a handful of close friends. Mara wore a simple dress and carried wildflowers from the mountain. She thought of Elias, wished he could see this, wished he could know she'd found a way to honor both his memory and her own future. The years that followed were the happiest Mara had known. She continued her work at the hospital, now training a new generation of healers. Clara grew into a skilled physician herself, eventually taking over much of Mara's teaching responsibilities. Morrison retired, leaving the hospital in Mara's capable hands. And Mara discovered that healing could take forms she'd never imagined. She established a refuge house for women and children fleeing violence, created apprenticeship programs that gave young people from the mountains access to medical training, wrote legislation that improved working conditions in the mills and mines, used her influence, and Whitaker's, to reshape Greenville into a place where the vulnerable had advocates instead of just predators. She became, in her own quiet way, a force that changed lives. On a warm evening in late summer, Mara stood on the ridge above Greenville, looking down at the town that had once been her prison and was now her home. She was 45 years old. Her hair showed threads of silver. Her hands bore the scars of decades of healing work. Her body carried the permanent reminders of that long-ago night when she'd run barefoot into the snow. But she was whole in ways that had nothing to do with physical scars. Movement behind her made her turn. A young woman approached, maybe 16, with frightened eyes and bruises hidden beneath long sleeves. Mara recognized the look immediately, had seen it in mirrors and in Clara's face, and in 100 other women who'd come to her seeking refuge. "Are you Mara Holloway?" the girl asked hesitantly. "I am." "They said, in the last town, they said you help people like me, people who need to run." Mara's throat tightened. "They said right. What's your name?" "Emma." The girl's voice wavered. "My name is Emma." Of course it was. The universe had its patterns, its echoes. Mara thought of the other Emma, Elias's daughter, dead before her time. Thought of all the Emmas who'd been lost to violence and fear, but also of all the Emmas who could be saved. "Come with me, Emma." Mara held out her hand. "You're safe now. I'll teach you everything you need to know to build a life that's yours. It won't be easy, but I promise it'll be worth it." The girl hesitated, then took Mara's hand. Together they walked down the ridge toward Greenville, toward the hospital and the refuge house, and all the hard, beautiful work of healing. Mara thought about the path that had brought her here, from her father's cabin to Elias's hollow to this moment, leading another broken girl toward hope. She'd run barefoot through the snow, seeking only survival. But she'd found something greater. She'd found purpose. She'd found love. She'd found the power to transform not just her own story, but the stories of everyone who came after. The beaten girl who'd fled into darkness had become the light others ran toward. And that, Mara thought, as Emma's grip tightened on her hand, was the truest form of healing there was. Years later, when Mara's story was told around Greenville's fires and dinner tables, people would argue about which part was most important. Some said it was the night she ran. Others claimed it was her poisoning of Webb's men, or her negotiation of the contract, or her marriage to Whitaker. But those who knew her best, Clara, now running her own clinic in the next county, Morrison's daughter, who'd learned medicine at Mara's knee, the dozens of women and children who'd found safety in the refuge house, they knew the truth. The most important part was the moment Mara chose to stop running and start building. The moment she decided that survival wasn't enough, that she deserved to live fully and help others do the same. That was the moment everything changed. That was the moment a victim became a healer, and a healer became a force that reshaped the world. Mara Holloway lived to be 78 years old. She died peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by people who loved her, in a town she'd helped build into something worth believing in. Her last words, spoken to Emma, who'd become like a daughter to her, were simple. Keep going. Keep healing. Keep being the refuge. Emma promised. And she kept that promise. Just as Clara had kept it. Just as the countless others Mara had touched, kept it. The legacy didn't end with Mara's death. It multiplied, spreading outward in ripples that touched lives she'd never meet, solving problems she'd never see, offering hope to people born long after she was gone. Because that's what healing does. It doesn't end with one person. It spreads. It grows. It becomes something larger than any individual life. Mara Holloway had run from hell and built heaven, had taken the worst thing that ever happened to her and transformed it into the best thing that happened to everyone else. And in the end, isn't that what any of us hope for? To take our pain and turn it into someone else's possibility, to break the cycles that broke us, to be the person we needed when we were lost and afraid. Mara did that. She became the refuge, and because of her, so did countless others. That's how broken girls become healers, how victims become forces of nature, how one person's choice to survive becomes an entire community's chance to thrive. That's the story of Mara Holloway. Mountain girl, healer, refuge, legend.